Good morning. Are you there?
Good morning.
Good morning, Siobhan. Good morning, Corey. Jessica's here. We're waiting on Beth. We'll get started. How's everybody? There's Jessica. How's everybody today?
Good.
Doing okay.
Well, again, I apologize for not meeting in Charlotte, but I'm going to get this thing on tape in case we have some more folks that they register next week. I don't know what the holdup is, but I do acknowledge that classes don't start till next Wednesday, and so they sometimes don't register till then. There may not be any more. There was 12 in the pipeline. We'll see, but if not, I'm happy with the 4 that we've got. Beth will be with us here in a minute. I talked to her boss last night. She better show up. Um, Steve Law's called last night to check on all of y'all. Seriously, he did. He regrets not being with us, but he's doing the interim superintendency in Gaston, his home. They were able to pry him away from Gardner Webb. They said it's old home week. You got to come back. He was retiring in December anyway, and from Gardner Webb, and so they convinced him to come back and do an interim until January in Gaston County. Of course, he's from Gastonia, lived there, except for when he was superintendent elsewhere. You have to live in that county. But he called to check on y'all last night. Said he'd love to be with us, but he's pretty busy right now. The night that he was announced, of course, I knew it was going to be announced. I texted him that it was now official that he was dumber than me for going back into the fire at our age. But he went anyway, and I am so pleased he's having the time of his life, whether he'll admit it or not. But it kind of leads into our discussion this morning, and this is a conversation, and I'm going to learn more about you in just a minute. But I kind of want to follow up on that crazy story that I told Wednesday night of this week. That was absolutely a true story. But all I could say, well, in the role that I was then, I couldn't tell the kind of things that I did because I didn't do good things. The deputy district never does the good things. They deal with big kid problem, adults who get in trouble. That's basically what you do from one crisis to the next. But about the best I could say from my 17 years as principal is I hired her. Well, you got to do more than that now. That's last century stuff. When I started principaling in 1985, all you did was just hire good teachers and send them down to the room. Kind of like, have any of you ever been exposed to David Collins' Good to Great? Now I am not a Collins fan. I'll tell you right now, and I'll tell you why. When I became principal at Eastway Junior High School in Charlotte, I had the day that I walked in the door, I had 30. This was in 1995, and I'd been principal, AP principal for 10 years, so I wasn't new. Been in the central office for a year, but now out in rural districts, out in the woods, as I call it. But I finally made the big time at last. And if anybody knows what song reference that's from, that's for extra credit. I finally made the big time at last. That's from Shooting Star by a bad company. But anyway, I was like Johnny. I made the big time at last. Got to Charlotte, had 37 vacancies the day I walked in the door. Now, Collins says just get the best people and get them in the right seats on the bus, and then get them in the right seats. Well, what if there ain't any good people? Or in that case, what if there ain't any people? Well, I believe I said in 1995, this is going to be the coming crisis of our business. That eventually we're going to get to the point where everybody's going to be like an Eastway, where not only can we not get good people, we can't get any people. And so that's why I'm not a Collins fan, is what do you do now, hero? So it can't be back to the days where you just hired the best people, sent them down the room as principal, and then went on about your business. You have to be an instructional leader now. You have to grow these people, whatever ones you get, into the people that you need them to be. That's where you folks have such an advantage. Y'all are all instructional mavens. Y'all are experts at instruction. my generation was not, and the generation that came behind me. When I started principaling, all we did was took the California Achievement Test, and we just took it. It didn't matter. And then, in 1983, the Basic Education Plan was passed in North Carolina and most states in 83 or 84. And then said that every child gets a basic education, and the legislators patted themselves on the back and went back to, backroom bargaining. And somebody said, smart guy in the back said, wait a minute, what is a basic education? And they said, well, we don't really know. And so it took 6 years to define what a basic education was. And so they wrote what was originally known as Standard Course of Study, big, thick white notebooks. I mean, thick. You probably haven't seen them, but they're still around somewhere. But they wrote one for every grade level in elementary and middle, and then they wrote one for every course in high school. I'm talking about standards, goals, objectives. I mean, you had to get you a small boy to carry them around for you. They were so heavy. And so that happened. They were full. It took from 83 to 89. And they said, all right, this is what a basic education to get. And again, they patted themselves on the back, and went to go back to backroom dealing. And that same smart guy in the back stood up and said, wait a minute. So how do we know they're getting that? I said, well, we don't know. So in 1989, 89, they started working on it. So in 1990, 91, performance-based accountability was introduced pretty much nationwide, especially in North and South Carolina. In North Carolina, it was actually called PBAP, Performance-Based Accountability Program. And they said, we're going to measure whether students are getting a basic education or not. And somebody said, well, how are you going to measure? They said, well, we're going to start state testing. So in 1991, 92, state testing was rolled out, and that was what we now know as the North Carolina Accountability, their state report card system. But the initial version of the state report card only had comparative accountability. It just looked at your school as a group. Hey, Beth, how are you this morning? So I've just gone through the history of accountability to where we hopefully get to today. And I started with the basic ed plan, standard course of study, the big old white notebooks. Now we're talking about testing. So state testing, the ABC program was introduced in 91, 92, 93. And we started in elementary school and we worked our way up in the grades. We didn't get to high schools until about 96, 97. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so we introduced state testing, but it was just simply comparative accountability. How good does your group do? Now, as you all know, as instructional mavens, comparative accountability is just about who you got, not what you do with it. It pretty much whoever walks in. So like the 15 years that my wife taught right across the edge of the lake here over in Davis, she was at the IB school over there, lab school, and they had the 240 best and brightest kids out of 140,000 kids in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. They had the 240 smartest kids, best and brightest. It was a lab school. I mean, these kids, two things you have to remember about a school like that. Number one, don't let them get in direct sunlight because their glasses are so thick it'll burn their paper. Number two, the janitor is the most important person in the organization. As long as he can get the front door open every day, the scores walk right in. I mean, comparative accountability is about who you got, not what you do with it. It took us 20 years to get to finally understanding that it's more about growth than what you do with them than who you got. But that's the model we were in for 20 years, was just who have you got. And that gored a lot of oxes and made a lot of people angry. But we're now focusing on growing our kids. But the whole notion is that we can't be principals anymore that simply hire the best teachers and send them down to the room and go on about our business. Number one, we can't find teachers, but when we do, they're not the best ones. We have to grow them into the people that we need for them to be.
Mhm.
And so the overarching notion here, and I'll share my screen, the overarching notion is this. Let me do a screen share. It goes back to this. Let me move this out of the way so I can see. You have to impact student learning and development. That's what school's about. School's about teaching and learning. It's about creating a culture of teaching and learning in your building. It's not about ball games. It's not about talent shows. It's not about any of that. It's about teaching and learning. So when I go to Wilmington, and especially when I used to have to teach in Wilmington, when I go to Wilmington, I get on 40 and go to Raleigh. I go around the loop, 40 turns from west to east, and it turns, north to south, and you make the loop and you head toward Wilmington. Well, right after you make the loop, the first exit there is to the backside of Garner. And I had some interns over there, and the name of the exit there, the road is Jones Sausage Road. Famous Dale story. True story. There's a big old plant out there that makes sausage for all. It's a packing plant for all these different sausage brands that you see national. And so the question is what do they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. What do we do in school? We teach kids, period. That's our focus. It can't be like, just making sure that the door's open. It can't just be about hiring good teachers and sending them down to the room. We have to make sure that we create a culture of teaching and learning in our buildings. That's the most important thing. That's a completely different focus than 30 years ago being a principal. The more modern version is you have to be a real instructional leader. Now, you can't be a C&I instructional leader where you go stay in rooms all day, but you have to make sure that you're hiring people, that you're training people, that your emphasis every day. And the way that we divide that up, of course, is PLCs. That's the heart, that's the backbone of that. That's why we're going to do the compass points activity this morning. Is we divide into PLCs and groups, and we go about the business of instruction of kids in schools. That is our vehicle. That's our first evidence in the MSA program, is teaching you folks how to set those things up and run them. Not that you do that as principal, but you have to oversee that process to make sure that that's happening in your buildings. So that's an overview of what the principalship is now. It's about teaching and learning. It's not about ball games and activities and clubs and all the other stuff that we kind of get sidetracked into. So the first thing that you have to ask yourself, and this is going to lead into y'all introducing yourself to me. The first thing that you have to do is a self-reflection of where will your hide be, HIDE, and not your skin, but the place that you hide as an administrator. And we have to fight that to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We have to battle our own natural proclivities to do the right things as school leaders. We all have a hide. I'll tell you where mine was. Mine was cafeteria, ball field, gym, in those kinds of things was where I felt, as an operational person, that I felt comfortable. Many of you, the classroom is where you feel comfortable, and you say, well, I'm doing instruction, so but you're neglecting the other parts of the job. So hopefully through the course of this course, we'll understand what the entire job is, and that our natural proclivities is to do this rather than the entire job. You can't sit in classrooms all day as a principal. You'd love to. I'd love to, but there's too many other things that you'll neglect if you do that. So, hopefully through the course of this course, you will find out, you'll do some self-assessment and say, these are the things that I want to do every day, but here's the things that I have to do every day. Because you don't want to be that school leader that has to get that visit from somebody like me who used to have to make this visit, when I would have to go out and say to principals, what were you doing that we weren't paying you for that kept you from doing the things that we were paying you for. We needed you to do your teacher observations and get those observations in because of the observation system. We needed for you to get your attendance in, to get your budget in, to develop your school improvement plan. We needed for you to do all those things. What were you doing that you didn't get that done? We needed for you to put your data, your suspension data and your incident data, not just your suspension, but your incident data in PowerSchool. Why did you not get that done? As we'll learn in the second half of the course, North and South Carolina are flat grant funding states. And what that means is they work off a modified accrual accounting system. You give the state data, they give you money. So when we talk about, let me stop my share, and I'm still with you now. I've got to do some changing here. When we talk about per pupil funding for the state, and the state pays for your teachers, by the way, except for your federal teachers. You know, your federal program teachers are paid by the federal government. EC, Title I, AIG, CTE, your vocational teachers, ESL, all your special POPs people are paid for by the federal government. They pay for the programs and the teachers. All other teachers are paid for by the state. That comes out of that $8,000 a year per pupil that they send to the district. But now here's the trick. They don't send the $8,000 up front. They don't even send $8,000. They send $800 10 times. After you, so you got to have money on hand for the first month of school as a school district. You pay, and if you give them the appropriate data, they'll reimburse you in 10 monthly installments what you're spending. But if you don't give them data, they don't give you money. So there's a lot of things that principals have to do in order to keep the money coming from the state to pay their teachers, because that's who pays teachers. Now, you can have local money that you add on to that, and we'll talk about the Leandro case in the second half, where the poor district sued the state and said, you're not giving us enough money, because in the end, we're not spending as much per pupil as the wealthy districts. And that's true. They lost, and we still have a flat grant funding. So if you're a student with Beth in Gaston County, Gaston County gets $8,000. But if you're right across the river, you still get $8,000 in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. But Charlotte-Mecklenburg puts an additional $4,000 local money with it and spends $12,000 per pupil. Gaston County can't do that. So in the end, it's not equal. But when the state says, it's a national case, the Leandro case says it only has to start equal. What you add after that. So there may be additional teachers at your building that are locally paid, but not much anymore, because in '66, states got out of capital business, and so the local now has to pay for all their buildings and the upkeep of their buildings. And so their local budgets are stretched to do that. So the bigger overall here is we work on a financial system. We give the state data, they give us money. And so we have to understand that as principals. We can't go hide and neglect those kinds of things. We have to make sure that we're doing all the operational pieces, or the money just doesn't work. And when the money doesn't work, things don't go well in school. So that's an overview of where we're going to try the first half of the course to understand what the job is, the instructional piece of how we work with PLCs. Now, normally in the first half, we would do the AppTel as well as the AppSell. The AppTel is then, once we figure out how to form PLCs, do our data dives, and set about, instructional programming so that we could get kids teaching and get teachers teaching and kids learning. Then we would develop a professional growth plan for our school. We won't do that this semester, because I know y'all know how to do that already. Y'all have already done that. That PLP, professional learning plan, we teach our folks to do that as well. Again, back to Collins, I'm not a fan of, but get the best people, get them on the bus. Again, what if there are no people or not the right people? You got to take the people you got and make them the right people. That's the notion here. the ACTEL. So that's what we would normally do, but y'all have already done that. So we'll move that evidence over. Y'all know how to go about setting up a professional development plan, but we're going to focus on data diving and how to set up PLCs and have them data dive and be very intentional about how we go about instructionally leading a school, but to the point where we can't be the people who go to the room and do this and meet with every one of the PLCs. We have to teach them. We have to build capacity within our faculties because we have those other things the state requires us to do to generate the data that keeps the money flowing back to us. We have to work the school improvement plan. We have to work that budget. We have to make sure our school is getting fed. We have to do our teacher observation. We have to work with the community. We have to work on teacher working conditions. All those things that we have to do that run a school. And so these courses, the two that we're doing this semester, are about how do you actually run a school, not theoretically, but in reality, how do you run a school to make sure that that it's focused on student achievement. Now, I'll tell this now, Monday night when I meet with all the new MSA candidates, and it's about 100, I think there's about 115 of them this semester, new ones in our MSA program. First thing I'm going to tell them is what I'm going to tell you right now. If you're one of those people who thinks that testing is, doesn't reflect everything that the kid knows and it's not the most important thing, get out now. School administration is not for you. It's all that matters is student achievement. You will be judged on how well your school does or doesn't do. If the scores didn't matter, we wouldn't keep them. Now we can agree to disagree and think that they're not the right thing. And so as I close out this first long-winded soliloquy this morning and get y'all talking, let's look at the state report card. Let me share my screen and I should have had it already queued up, but if I do, it times me out. So move that out of the way. So all you have to do is Google NC report cards. And it says available here. And we'll go to Gaston County. And we'll go to Bessemer-Merceny. No, we won't go there. We're gonna go to my buddy's school here. Right here. We're gonna go to John Chavis Middle School. Is my screen sharing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sometimes this thing won't share. All right. So when we look at the state report card, we look to the left and we start reading this thing. We look, the overall grade is a C. That's their performance. Again, that's just comparative accountability. That's more about who they've got. They're a 56. That's a grade of C. This is John Chavis is in Cherryville. For those of you who don't know, it's a lower middle class and lower class community. I don't mean they're classless. I love Matt Reichert, by the way, who's principal there. Matt was in my group in Ashbrook, the golden group from back in 2011. Had Matt and Robbie Lovelace, who's on the school board. Had Mitch Allen, who's principal. It had Rebecca Powers, who's now in your central office, and we had 6 in that group from Cherryville alone. But I was with Matt this spring. I went to spend a day with him, and so these are my, I'm not from Gaston, but these are my peeps. I love the folks there, but this is who they are. They know that. They know they're not Ballantyne and Charlotte. So that's who they got. But more importantly, let's look over here. Look at what they did. They made their growth. Hold 1 second. I got to take this call. All right, I'm back. I called Charlotte this morning to make sure that they weren't holding a room for us. So if we look at the growth over here on this side, and that's the EVOS scores. Everybody knows what EVOS is, I'm assuming. That's the value added system where and I'll teach you that one a little bit later, how that formula works. But every kid now in school has a predicted growth score that kid would make that would show a year's growth. And schools are monitored on growth on how many kids, how many kids in a teacher's classroom, the standard is 85% meet their growth score, and it's an individual score. And then schools are judged on how many do 85% of the teachers make growth. And so what we do is we isolate the teacher in that EVOS model, and I'll teach you the EVOS model. We know this is about what we're doing with those kids. And so their kids at John Chavis are meeting expected growth. So that means they're doing a good job in their school. The 56, that doesn't look good. The C doesn't look good, but that's about who they got, not what they do with them. If you look on the other side, their academic growth history has been really good since Matt's been there. They exceeded 1 year, and then they've met every year since, and they were close to exceeding this past year. And so they're doing a good job. But again, this matters. Scores matter. Growth met in math and reading, looking at economically disadvantaged. We can break this down by subgroup. We can look at reading performance, science performance, English learner process, test participation, how many kids are being tested, students with disability. And we look at the quality of their teachers, how many of them are nationally board certified. We look at teacher qualifications to make sure that we have qualified people. How many emergency licenses do we have? The number of students, average class size, student enrollment, average course size. We got their suspension data and incident data from Power School. We have their persistently dangerous totals over here, which is federal. That's from No Child Left Behind. We'll talk about that later as well. We got chronic absenteeism. I mean, we have all these things. Use of funds. I mean, again, let me stop my share. If scores didn't matter, we wouldn't keep them. We wouldn't report them. We wouldn't make decisions. The two things that principals are evaluated most is their report card, their student achievement data, and their teacher working conditions data. Now, I'm guessing everybody has seen teacher working conditions survey, knows what that is. That's a federal requirement for retention. There's a couple federal requirements for state schools. One is that every other year that we give a teacher working condition survey, which promotes retention of highly qualified teachers. And the other is persistently dangerous. And we'll talk about persistently dangerous. There's 9 acts that qualify. So in 1991, the federal law, and we'll cover this next half, said that 2 things. No Child Left Behind legislation in 1991 said 2 things. Number 1, students don't have to go to low performing schools, and you have to have a system to measure academic. That's what we just looked at. And the second is they don't have to go to persistently dangerous schools. That will either dissolve those schools or we'll let students go somewhere else, or both. And so data counts, data matters. Our performance data matters, and our disciplinary data matters, because the feds will, the state will close you down. The feds will stop funding you if you don't achieve, or if you're dangerous. So That's the 800-pound gorilla sitting on the couch, folks. Test scores matter. Data matters. We have to do everything that we can to make a good number go up and a bad number, the discipline, go down. That's your job as a school principal. If somebody said, Dale, we want to create a culture of teaching and learning, that's our overarching philosophy as a principal. But the actual how-to is good numbers got to go up, bad numbers got to go down, period. If not, they'll get somebody else. That's that's how simple it is. Understanding that if you become an assistant principal, the initial contract is 2 years. At a year and a half, they make a decision whether to keep you as an AP. Same happens as a principal. Your initial principal contract will be 2 years. At the middle of the second year, they make a decision. Are you moving a good number up and a bad number down or not? Remembering that principaling is a contract business now. It is not tenured. It is not career. It is not ongoing. It's a contract business. After your initial 2-year contract, if you're being successful, you'll get a 4-year contract. And then you'll work on 4-year contracts after that. But again, you'll be evaluated on making a good number go up on your report card and teacher working condition survey, and make bad numbers go down. Because those are things that are measured. So that's the context of that's the job, folks. That's what we do. Again, Jones Sausage, they make sausage. In school, we teach kids. And we can never lose that focus. That every decision we have to make. And here's the transitional piece to where I'm going to go to you this morning to let you start talking. Every decision you have to make has to be made for kids and not for the people who work in the building. And so one of the things that I would do every year at the 17 years that I was principal, one of the things that I would do early on in the first teacher work day every fall, excuse me, while I sneeze here, is apologize to teachers. I'm sorry, we can't run school for you. When we talk about master scheduling in the second half, that's the first one is there are 5 rationales for scheduling school. You're number 5. I'm sorry, that's the way it works. Federal programs have to come first. We have to meet federal law first. It's most restricted. You don't misspend federal money but one time, and then they have somebody new, and you're over in the unemployment line. So federal programs come first. Again, EC 504. Your intervention kids, ESL, AIG, CTE, Title I. Those have to come first in your schedule, not what teachers want. Second, your state law has to come second. How many days how many students are in class size, how many hours, how many minutes, those kinds of things. Third, your local board policy. Are we doing 4x4? Are we doing AB day? How many minutes of reading in elementary school per day? How many minutes of math? Those kinds of things. And fourth comes your EBOS data, teacher performance. And then finally, fifth and last, comes teacher input. And it has to be that way. But every decision that you make in a school as a leader has to be based on what's good for kids, not what's good for teachers. Now, if we can do a double, a twofer, where we can do something good for both, that's a good thing. But if not, has to be them. All right. So that's our context this morning. We understand what the job, or I told you what the job is. Hopefully you understand it. And so part of what we have to do in this time is shift your lens from that of a teacher to that of an administrator. And that's a tough lens. That's a tough change. You're not going to be working with students anymore. You're going to be working with adults. That's a different job. That's a completely different career. So like in the old Gallup system to identify principals, one of the questions was if it paid exactly the same. And this is the question I'm asking you this morning as we lead into you telling us who you are. The first question I want you to ask is, if it paid exactly the same, would you prefer to work with kids as a teacher or work with adults as an administrator? If it paid exactly the same. So that's the question this morning. So Siobhan, you're top left on the screen. I'm going to start with you. Who are you? Where do you work? What do you do? And who do you prefer to work with?
My name is Siobhan Cook. I currently work for Rowan Salisbury Schools. Right now, I just started this year. I am a 10th grade ELA teacher. After about 4 years of being an elementary school read and design coach. Um, and if I'm thinking about whether or not I want to work with kids or teachers, I think this year I chose to work with kids because it was a lot working with the teachers,
I
especially
mean,
especially in Rowan County with our renewal district.
yeah, yeah. One of my former students, Jackie Tinsley, just got a job as an innovation person in the central office there. She was the
Oh,
AP. She was the AP at the early college in Kannapolis, and she
mhm.
just took that job. It was just announced this week. But
Yeah,
yes, they're trying to do renewal there. That's a tough gig working with teachers in a when you're trying to get them to change.
right.
And yes, um, I
They
have a friend
they
who
have new
just
people who come in that have never worked with a child before in their life.
that's right. Back to that Collins scenario, get the best people and put them on the bus and get them in the right seat. Well, what if there aren't any best people? What if, you know, some districts, what if there are no people? But even
Right.
then, the best people, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll share with you quickly a story. I'm not making it. I asked this question in a job interview one time. I was interviewing for a teacher. As I said, when I walked into Eastway Junior High on the east side of Charlotte in 1995, I had 37 vacancies. I was interviewing for jobs. I asked a man in a job interview, "You don't wear a chicken suit, do you?" I asked him, "You don't wear a chicken suit, do you?" Now, a little background to the story was I was just trying to hire anybody I could find. And this fella came in and he said, listed under his hobbies was the Charlotte Checkers. Now they're back out at the old Bojangles, the original Charlotte Coliseum on Independence. But that was their home at the time, the first go around. And they had a group of supporters, and he was a big fan of theirs. And they had a group of supporters that would get drunk and wear chicken suits. I'm not making this up. They let them come out on the ice between the periods of the hockey game and act a fool. And that was our home. We were right there. I mean, Eastway is just on the other side of the interstate there. And our parents and our teachers worked the concession stands at those games for our booster club. And I thought, Lord have mercy, if I hire this man and he's one of those drunks that goes and wears chicken suits to the game, fights, and carries on, they'll fire me if I hire him. So I said, now, your personal life's your personal life. But now, if you're one of them guys, I can't hire you. He said, no, I'm not one of them, but I know what you're talking about. And I said, all right, I'm going to hire you. But he'd never taught school a day in his life, and he's a middle-aged man. But that to your point, that's who you're getting now. Just people who this looks like this would be good. They got the shifting economy. They lost their job in whatever they had been doing for 20 or 30 years. Either that or a bunch of kids that can't find the building 3 out of 5 days.
Mm.
You're just and I had to hire a bunch of kids, and I was just hoping every day that they just show up sober and clean clothes. That was the standard. Can you show up sober and clean clothes and not come in with the same clothes you had on yesterday with 15 bar stamps on the game? Where you spent all night, clubbing and partying with the rest of your roommates who were in the service industry, either bartenders or waitresses. They tended to all live together, couldn't afford housing on their own. And so that's who you get. So knowing going into it, Siobhan's a perfect example. Knowing going in now, when you're being asked to work with teachers, A, you may not have any, and B, the ones you get may not even be what we now call ready. We used to call them mature, but now we call it readiness. Can you show up on time? Can you show up sober, clean clothes, and prepared? They can't even do that. Now, our business is about bell ring, go to class, bell ring, go to next class. You can't be hoping at 8:30 that you're going to have enough people in your rooms that they're here, or if they show up that they're not sitting in the back sleeping, trying to sleep off last night's party time. that's the notion. Well, we're back to there all over the states now, all over the Southeast. I understand it's national, but I know it is in North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia, Tennessee, the states that we work in the MSA program. They're just hunting people, anybody. And you get a bunch of kids, especially in a party town like Charlotte, who want to keep the college party going. It's a tough gig, but you're exactly right, Siobhan. It might be better to work with students for a while, understanding that leadership jobs are about working with adults, and the problem with that is they don't act like adults.
Right.
The kids don't, or you get a bunch of older people, and I can say this because I am old folks. You get a bunch of older folks and it's awfully hard to teach old dogs new tricks, get them to change. Oh my Lord. And so this is the job that we're facing now. Right behind me, 6 houses down the street here on Crown Lake Drive, John Petroselli lives. John's a friend of mine. He's professor at Wake Forest in psychology. And he's written extensively about why people can't or won't change. He runs experiments on the undergraduates at Wake Forest. And he's written extensively about that people just won't change. We think, well, we'll just get people to change. Kurt Lewin's, change model. We'll just unfreeze, move them, then refreeze them. Get that unfreezing part. That's the hard part. That's assuming past the problem. I'm afraid we can just get them to unfreeze. So you got a bunch of kids who are not professional, not mature enough to have a real professional job, and you got a bunch of adults who've done other things all their life. And even if it was in the school business, they don't want to change from how they used to do it.
Right.
But that's the job now. And Siobhan is exhibit A of what I'm telling you. It is the challenge now for school administration. She is the living example of that. Thank you for that, Siobhan. I mean, that's so illustrative for our purposes.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. Corey?
Hello. I'm Corey Standridge. Live in Lexington, South Carolina. I teach at Irmo High School. This is my 14th year teaching high school English. And obviously for the longest time, I would say I'd prefer kind of working with kids, but after 14, ish years, kind of doing, and it's not that I don't love it, because I definitely do love it, but the monotony of it, I think I've reached that point in my teaching career where it doesn't feel new anymore. Like I'm just, and it's still fun and I still like it, but just doing the kind of day to day of having the same 20 kids in front of you, the same stories, like being an English teacher, it's, that part hasn't really changed much. So part of the reason in doing this is wanting not necessarily something new, but something kind of more and kind of more influential or more kind of up there,
impactful.
Out there.
Yeah. You want to be more impactful.
Yeah.
Yay. Corey just explained the whole notion of an MSA program. It's for people who want to contribute more, who are aspirational, who come to the maturity level in their own career and their own lives where they want to have a broader impact. That's the whole notion. What we don't want to hear is I want to get paid more, or I'm tired of kids. I hate kids. Well, this is not the business if you don't like kids. We're looking for people like Corey. Corey is the kind of person who wants to be more impactful in his career, who has that service need within him to have a wider impact. That's why you're supposed to get into school administration, not just because you want to be the boss and boss people around. Leadership is service, folks. Pro Deo et humanitate, service for God and humanity. That's the notion here, is that when you become a leader, you become a servant first, if you're the right kind of leader. And that's what we hope to stress at Gardner Webb is our motto again, for service for God and humanity. But I hope that you got a dose of this in the EDCI program in your coursework. Is we train leaders to be servants, not to be transactional leaders, punishment reward, but to be transformational leaders, to lead by example, that want to give more and want to progress and face new challenges, and understanding that there will be challenges. There'll be learning curves. It'll be harder, but it'll be more rewarding. That's the whole notion, is that the reward system, not financially, but the reward system is greater in school leadership. Yeah, we all have 1,000 stories about the kids. I was at the pinning ceremony not too long ago at graduation. We used to do a separate pinning ceremony. It's only stopped just recently for our undergraduate student teachers who were graduating. We brought them in the night before graduation and did a ceremony over at Dover Chapel there on the campus, main campus at Gardner Webb. And one of the young ladies and we all turn out, in our regalia and go through that, even though I'm on the graduate side. But there was a young lady, kind of fair-skinned and kind of red-headed, and her last name was McDaniel. And I saw her father; he was fair-skinned and red-headed. They were from Rutherford County. And so when we got done, I walked over to him and I said, "Which set are you? Are you Johnny or Joel's set?" And he said, "Well, I'm Joel's. How did you know?" I said, "I taught you, Daddy. You know, a long time ago. They were the Bills Creek McDaniels." And my point is I still remember those kids. I still remember and cherish the relationships I had with those kids. I didn't get out of teaching because I didn't like kids. I loved the kids. I remember them to the day. His daddy broke his leg sliding into second base there on the hilltop. He was a tremendous baseball player, as was his father, who was a peer of mine, my father's. And so, but the whole notion here is that you don't get out of teaching and into administration because you don't like school or don't like kids. And you have relationships with those kids that you will cherish always, but you want to have a broader impact. I still remember those kids that I taught 40-something years ago and loved every one of them. And still remember the stories. I still remember when Joel Jr. slid into second base, broke his ankle. I still remember all those kids. I remember them better than anything else in my career, quite honestly, is the relationship I had with those students. But at some point, some people want more. And that's the whole notion of this program, is for those people who want more, who want to be servants, who want to have a broader impact, not just want an easier job that pays better. All right, Jessica.
I'm Jessica Floyd. I'm an assistant principal at St. Paul's Elementary. This is my first year as assistant principal. I was the academic coach prior to that. I would say that my lens has shifted from student to working with teachers now for the benefit of the student, to make if I can impact the teaching from the adult perspective, then I can impact the student.
So yeah, I should have just had Jessica do this section. See, she summed it up so much better than I did. You want to impact the kids, but through the adults that you work with. That's exactly it, Jessica. So you're at St. Paul's?
Yes, sir. I'm in Robeson County.
In Robeson County? Yeah.
Yes.
You know Danny Stedman?
No, I don't know Danny Stedman.
All right. Dr. Stedman lives in St. Paul's. He works for us in the MSA program. I'll be with him Monday night. He starts our students out in 601. Dr. Stedman was principal at Red Springs.
Okay.
He was principal at Red Springs, and then he was a longtime assistant superintendent. He's been working for Gardner Webb for about 12 years. He retired. He's now the executive director of community and schools for Robeson County and runs that little charter school over at UNC Pembroke.
Oh, okay. I do know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
So he has a unique perspective, having been in K-12 and now charter and working for community and schools. He's also on the board of your community college there. And so But you're exactly right. You want to affect the lives of kids, but in a broader scope through working with teachers. That's exactly it, Jessica. That's exactly it. Beth?
Well, I have been in education. This is going into my 28th year. I was in the classroom for 20 years, where I taught everything from 2nd through 5th grade. Then a door opened and we opened a choice STEAM elementary school in our district. So I left the classroom, became a lead teacher there so that I worked with the teachers more. And, during my tenure in the classrooms, one thing I found is that I had a tendency to gravitate towards the new teachers. Wanted to hear what the current things were that they came out of college with, things like that, so that they helped keep me current. But I also helped them, give them advice, mentoring, things like that. So, through mentorships, I got to where I was working more with the adults. Then I left Talks Nest and took the district academic facilitator position, where I would support schools in learning their content better as far as their standards and supporting them in that way, trying to grow their capacity. And I loved my time with students, but it was definite. The move to more working with the adults has been a really great experience for me. And being a principal isn't anything I necessarily ever thought about doing, but because I work with teachers so much and trying to help them to be the best they can be instructionally for their students, it became a natural segue that to kind of go there. And going off of what you said, Dr. Lamb, about being a principal as a servant job, I just finished reading this book, The Inspirational Leader, by Gifford Thomas, and it was amazing to me to read. And one of the things that it really talks about is having relationship with your teachers and having relationship with the students in the building, being able to listen before you jump and make decisions, different things like that. But it was the one thing that it continuously said is that a good leader is someone that can make their staff believe that the impossible is possible. And so that was a great read. So I ended up, now I've got his book, Unlock the Leader and the Hidden Leader Within You. So it's supposed to help you become the leader you're destined to be. So I'm excited to read that book next. But that is something. And one of my friends in a classroom recently posted a picture. It was the day before school is going to start, and her principal had a backpack vacuum cleaner on his back, and he was going around and helping vacuum the group rugs where the students would gather for theirs, when they weren't in their desks. But he was going around from classroom to classroom and helping vacuum. And that was one thing she said is he's always a servant first. And it's our principal of the year this year. And he is. I mean, he's one of those that is definitely exemplifies what a principal should be.
Who is he and where is he?
Justin Beam at North Belmont Elementary.
I believe he's one of ours. I've been to North Belmont. We had a student there, and pardon me for not remember her name, but I actually visited North Belmont not too long ago. I visited 14 schools in Gaston this spring.
Okay.
I took a day a week this spring and visited schools in Gaston because I had 14 interns in a special program that I took.
Okay.
So they got the worst of the program at Gardner Webb. And I visited every one of them. I went to their schools and sat down, and we had the kind of discussion. Well, not been much of a discussion so far. It's mostly been a soliloquy, but for the English teachers in the crowd. But a lot of good things happening. And I will, as we're coasting up against our break here, I'll tell to amplify what Beth just said. my first principalship was at a school that was built on when we integrated in North Carolina, and we'll talk about legal court cases the second half, but when we integrated, we had what had been black schools and white schools, and we integrated, and I became principal of one of the old facilities that had been a black school in a black community. And it was built on a Motel 6 design. Every room came outside. There wasn't an internal hallway in the whole place. They built it as cheaply as it could be built, and was asbestos. Eventually developed a cancer cell there, and they had to just tear it down. But when I was principal there, it was in wings. You know, you'd have a long wing, and then on either side the doors came out, and the rooms kind of butted up. They didn't have any pass-throughs, but anyway, so you had a breezeway outside. You had a concrete breezeway, you know, the shed roof over it, railing. And I didn't know it until the annual came out that year, but they had a picture of me, and I had a shoveling the walkways, snow off the walkways. It's in western North Carolina where it snowed a lot. And they had a picture of me in the annual. And I thought, of all the things that I've done, you know, of course, it kind of matched my intellect. And, you know, that was probably about the best thing I could do at that point. You know, my first principalship, shovel snow. But that kind of thing is impactful. I got more mileage out of that than any, you know, computerizing. Well, we were early in the years of computer then, but doing a schedule by computer the first time, and getting kids in the right rooms in the middle school. You know, that I thought that was a wizard thing to do, and it really was. Printed their schedules out on an old daisy wheel printer. Didn't even have a dot matrix, had a daisy wheel. And people thought, and I thought, boy, but you know, what they appreciated is I shoveled the walkways out, you know, on work days while we were out of school. I'd clean the walkways up. So when, you know, all the district would do was scrape the parking lot, but we had snow up, you know, knee high up against the doors where it would blow in. Kids couldn't get safely in and out of the rooms. And so, you know, me and the janitor get out and shovel the walkways. On work days, and that had more impact than anything else that I did at that school, I suspect. Well, you know, but it did match my intellectual capability, so I can't complain about that part. But to Beth's point, that picture of that principal with that backpack vacuum, I mean, that you got to do those things. When I was principal up on the side of the mountain in Burke County, when the custodian was out, I was on mop duty, and the custodian I had couldn't deal with vomit. You know, that happens every day in elementary school. You know, so I was on those cans of that yellow stuff you have to shake and throw down on the floor. If the cafeteria lady was out, I put on a hairnet. I had hair back then. Wore a hairnet, served lunch, drove the bus. Those kinds of things. That's that willingness, that servant piece. Sometimes goes further than the intellectual piece. People, you know, what is it? The old, you know, people don't care how much you know. They just want to know that you care, kind of thing. And that's got to be your goal every day, as Corey said, is you want to serve a broader audience, but you want to serve, period. You want to serve. You want the best mate. All right, we're at our first break. We normally break we'll be back on the air at 10:15. And somebody remind me when we come back, because I'm old and forget to start the recording again. But we'll, you know, we stay on time. Again, I'm actually 2 minutes early, but that's to your benefit. So I'll see you again at 10:15, and we'll move to our next section. Thank you for being with me this morning. I always thank you for choosing Gardner Webb. Oh, and we're back. All right, so let's look at the legal underpinning of the principalship in North and South Carolina. Now, I use North Carolina materials, so Corey, there's the same thing in South Carolina, but I just use these for brevity. So let's look at the North Carolina Assistant Principal Evaluation Manual, so that we can see what the legal underpinning is what the expectation is in your job situation. So let me share my screen, and I have that manual pulled up. All right, so here is the manual evaluation process, and there are 7 or 8, we'll talk about the difference in that, executive standards that you have to meet as a principal, and it has a rubric for each one of these. First is strategic leadership. Create conditions that result in strategically reimagining the school's vision, mission, and goals in the 21st century. That again, we can't teach school for the last century. We have to make sure that everybody has a vision of what we're doing, what we're preparing kids to do. In North Carolina, we have future ready. We have 21st century schools and skills. Y'all have seen all that stuff with technology, and then we have an actual blueprint or a vision calling future ready students in North Carolina, what that student will look like when we get done with them. And again, it's all based on performance, outcomes, achievement. It's based on those kinds of things. And so that's the first of these, and then the second, and it has all the individual objectives inside, elements inside of that. Now, you notice at Gardner Webb that we work on the notion of evidence and artifacts, and in MSA program we go a step further and develop the artifacts as well. So what is an evidence? Well, according to this manual, an evidence is a written summary of the work that the administrator does. So when you get evaluated, you have to have a written summary of the things you do. That's called an evidence. It's designed specifically for evaluation. Here's what I did and how I did it. That's why we work on evidence artifacts in these programs, in that the overarching notion of the MSA evidence program is we teach you how to build a school improvement plan. Because as you'll learn in the second half of the course, under North Carolina General Statute 115C288G, that one of your responsibilities as a school principal is develop a school improvement plan. You have a school improvement team. They develop a school improvement plan. It has to have an academic piece. That's the APSEL. It has to have a teacher or human resources professional growth piece. That's the APTEL. Have to build a legal master schedule. That's the OMA. You have to involve your community. That's the SCIP, Community Stakeholder Involvement Plan. You have to work on your teacher working conditions survey for the climate of your school. That's the TWC. That's the CAP. Then our 6th one, we put them all together into a school improvement action plan. We teach our folks how to build that school improvement plan, because that's the heart of what you do. Your budget should support it. Your schedule, master schedule, should support the initiatives of your school improvement team through that school improvement plan. So you have to evidence that, how you're meeting each of those areas of your school improvement plan. You have to write that. Now, what is an artifact? An artifact is not generated solely for the purpose of evaluation. It's a byproduct of the work that you do. And so to that end, they tell you what artifacts are. If you've done your work, you'll have a school improvement plan. Your teacher working condition survey will be improving, that you've got a school improvement team, that you actually do that. And then they'll look at your student achievement and testing data. That's what I'm telling you. You have to not only evidence the work that you've done in a written way, but you have to show them the actual artifacts. So in the MSA program, we actually build a second folio inside the task stream folio simply to catch artifacts. I won't have you do that. We didn't put that in yours, but I know that but you need to understand how you're going to be evaluated from a legal perspective is on the evidences that you write at evaluation time. These are the things that I did. And then be able to produce the artifacts that prove that you did those things. In the MSA program, we've even got it purted out. I can pull that up right quick. We even purred it out for our folks. What we do is, we tell them you got to keep a log of your clinical activities, and here are the activities that they have to do. They're all related to the 21 competencies that we'll talk about next. But we even identify for them where they'll find their artifacts. If you did your work, these are the artifacts as an MSA intern that you will have generated. We even perk those out, and we tell them that there'll be artifacts generated by doing these things. If you attend an IEP meeting, you'll generate an artifact for environmental awareness or sensitivity of those competencies. You'll generate artifacts. So we categorize our artifacts not by standards but by competencies. And here are the 21 competencies that go along with these standards: communication, change management, conflict management, creative thinking, customer service, and so on. So there's 21 competencies, and here are the standards: strategic, instructional, cultural, human resources, micro-political. But the notion here, and I won't go through each of these, but the notion is we have standards. And for each of those standards, we have to be able to tell in a written narrative what we did to meet that standard. And we have to produce artifacts that prove that we did what we said that we were going to do. That's the evaluation system for school administrators in both North and South Carolina, is evidence and artifacts. Now, one of the mistakes that candidates make all the time is they use those two terms interchangeably. They are not interchangeable. Again, an evidence is a written narrative of what you did. It's designed specifically for evaluation time so that you can tell. An artifact is generated from the actual work that you do. It's not just created for evaluation. If you did the work, it will be there. So back to this, and I want to further solidify what I just talked about there. This out of the way. And here are all the rubrics again, and it has the artifacts for each of these 7 standards: cultural leadership, managerial, external development, that's community, parent involvement, micro-political, and then there's a performance number 8 that goes back to EBOS. But here is what most specifically that you have to do. And it has it all laid out for you in this. The rubric is there. Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward in terms of that. And so let's go back to this other. Let's go back to this other. I can close that now. Let's go back to our other document here that I have. Move this out of the way. No, that's not the one I'm looking for. Let's go back to this document here. Again, these are the kinds of things that we would expect a clinical intern to be doing at their school in order to prepare themselves to be a school administrator. But again, we have them categorized as those 21 competencies. If you've done this, you will have met this competency, but there should also be an artifact generated by that. So you can see the things that we expect clinical interns to do. And what we're trying to do is mirror what you would do as an actual school leader. Now, I understand that assistant principal, that Jessica's in now is more of a technician level job. She will do more of these kinds of things. And then as principal, you do more of these leadership kind of things. But what we hope is that during time that you're a clinical intern or an AP, that you get to do some of these leadership things as well. But understanding that while the evaluation system is the same, and this is a point that I want to make for assistant principals and principals, you will naturally gravitate more to the technical things as an AP, but you can't just do those things to the exclusion of leadership kind of things as well, because we're projecting you down the road to be a principal. Nobody should get into the AP business to be an AP for life. That's not a for life kind of job. And you've got to be developing these leadership skills along with those technical things. Now, supervision, we don't, we put a limit of about 5 hours a semester on that on their log. They may do more than that, but as I always tell students, I mean, how hard is it to learn bus view? There's only 2 things to learn about bus view. Number 1, wear a coat long enough to cover you behind in the wintertime. And number 2, don't get run over. And after that, you pretty much got bus view. That's pretty much it. So that's not really a growth area kind of thing. The technical stuff, you've got to learn all these pieces. Now, some of you might have seen Power School, but you've probably only seen it from a teacher portal. Administrative portal has a lot more modules in it. EVOS, learning EVOS from the school level, not just the teacher level. Doing your teacher observations, learning how to run a PBIS program. You got to have some discipline system in your schools. Most of them use positive behavior intervention. RTI or MTSS, you got to know about those from a school perspective. So yes, you learn all these technical things as an AP, but you've got to work on these leadership things as well in order to develop yourself into the kind of person that we would trust to give the keys. One of the things that I tell students all the time is you can't be like Barney. The old Andy Griffith show, if any of you are old enough to remember Andy Griffith in the first year of the series, when Andy who was the sheriff, had to go to Raleigh. And so he turned the jailhouse over to Barney. And the first thing Barney did was deputize Otis, the town drunk, and gave Gomer a gun. Well, you wouldn't do either of those things. If you were a true leader, you'd know not to do that kind of stuff. Well, the whole notion here is you've got to get enough experiences as an AP in the leadership areas, not just the technical and supervision areas, that you can be trusted to give the keys to when Andy goes to Raleigh, and when your principal goes to the meeting or is out of the building, that you won't do something dumb. Now, one of the famous Charlotte Mecklenburg stories, this is absolutely a true story, by the way, illustrates what we're talking about. So back in the day, I think in 1973, Eastland Mall opened on the east side of Charlotte, and I was in high school, and it was just, for a kid and for out in the country, that was just, that was a miracle. It had a skating rink down at the bottom. Man, it was a happening kind of place. Well, over the years, South Park kind of took over, and as they cleaned up downtown, the urban renewal started in the 80s and 90s. The east side of town, where they moved all those people to, and it began to decline. Pretty rough clientele on the east side. I know. I was principal at Eastway Junior High, which is right there. On one side of the old Eastland Mall was Eastway Junior High. On the other side was Albemarle Road Junior High. And they were kind of companion schools, very, very tough population. And the principal was out. AP was, the lead AP was in charge, and kind of lost their grip and rang the bell one day because they'd been fighting all 3 lunch shifts. They'd been fighting at Albemarle Road, which was normal. So they just rang the bell and dismissed at 1:30. Dismissed at 1:30. Now, if you know anything about CMS, they triple the buses. I don't know if they still do or not. I've been retired for 12 years or 13, whatever, but we tripled the buses back in the 90s. What's triple the buses mean? Well, it means that You know, we ran a route, picked up elementary. We ran the same route and picked up middle. And we ran the route in high school. We didn't put them all on the same buses. And so, guess how many buses were on the bus lot at Albemarle Road Junior High when the AP rang the bell at 1:30? That would be 0 buses on the lot. So what did the kids do? Well, they came rolling down Royal Avenue, the driveway up off Albemarle Road. They just come rolling down the hill. 1,200 students just came rolling down the hill and went down Albemarle Road. They broke the windows out of all the businesses and McDonald's, turned cars over, set them on fire, went to the mall, about tore the mall down. It was a riot on the east side of town. That happened, folks. That's not hearsay. That happened. That's real. That's what we're talking about here is the whole notion of assistant principal evaluation. The legal basis is you develop these skills and abilities along the way to the point where we could turn a school over to you and trust that you are not going to ring the bell at 1:30 or deputize Otis to town drunk. It's a building process of you show the work that you do, you generate the artifacts, you get out there, you do the things. That's how you are evaluated. Is those kinds of things. They look at your test scores. They look at your TWC. They look at all those kinds of things. But that you know, in a larger sense, that you're a responsible person, that you're mature, you're ready for that, and you won't lose your grip and do something dumb when you're in charge. That's the whole notion of, very few people get the battlefield promotion from going from classroom or facilitator all the way to principal's office. Most of the time, you've got to make that transitional, and that's what the AP is. So a lot of the skills that we teach you in the MSA program that we're going to get big lots skill based, you'll do these things as AP. You've got to understand that you won't do these things a lot as principal, but you've got to go through that transitional time. Corey said they used to watch during the Braves rain delay on TBS. They would watch Andy Griffith's show. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's when you see it now. It's on TBS or those Ted Turner networks. My wife watches Me TV, and Andy's on Me TV. But yes, so the notion here is you have to grow in the job, but you've got to understand the legal perspective of how you're going to be evaluated. You can't just be a technician and succeed even as an AP. Jessica's in her first year, and she'll have relatively lower level tasks. But if she stays at that lower level, she'll never progress. She has to progress from those supervision and technical things into those leadership things. And so that leads me into what we're doing now. So we're going to work on our first of our evidences now. This was the lead into the app cell. Now you say, but Dale, principals don't do this. Yeah, they don't, but they have to learn this so that they can supervise it. They may do it as an AP. Eventually, principals rarely set up and run PLCs. They have somebody else, APs or facilitators or department chairs who do that, but they have to know how it works. You have to know everything as a principal, even though that might not be what you do every day. You have to know how it's done. So what we do is we go back over this. Now, you folks are much more advanced than our normal MSA people. Y'all have probably already done this. And so before I even open it up and start the app cell, if you've already done this, just tell us what you did. You don't have to do it again if you've already done it. But the whole notion of the app cell is to do a research-based data dive into how to set up and run a PLC, how to do a data dive on your standardized scores, got to be standardized scores, how to then develop a little action plan at your local school. Now, whether or not you know it, every school in North and South Carolina is charged with what they call a closing the gap program at their school. where they look at their subgroup data and they see who's kind of behind, and direct some resources to that group to try to improve them. Jessica's shaking her head up and down. Yeah, that's the first thing you do. Well, this is how you go about doing that in a very methodical, disciplined, we call this disciplined inquiry, where we have a set process of how we do this. We don't just expect it to happen or just kind of randomly attack it. There is a process, a 5-step process of how we do that. So that's where we're going now. Let me share my screen. All right, and I can close that one, and I'll move from there. So under App Cell Task and Prompts, and I've got some documents pulled up. I'll pull them up first. All right, so yeah, that's it. So under App Cell Task and Prompts. All right, so analysis and action plan for student learning. There are 5 tasks, and this is kind of an overview of those tasks. Professional learning communities. Research the tenets and functions of the professional learning community and assume a leadership role in developing a PLC to research, analyze data, and present a suggested course of action to the administrative team. Second, lead the PLC in collaborative research and analysis of all available data to identify a significant learning need that emphasizes digital learning if possible. Doesn't have to be digital learning. Lead the PLC in collaborative research in the area, the identified learning need, your most pressing need, and develop basic strategies to develop a sustainable growth plan. Lead the PLC in collaborative development of an action plan, and then elaborate the experience through reflection through the competencies. What competencies did you achieve by doing this project? And so it has this, and here's the first one. So let's switch over here to this document. Now, these are all underneath your materials. Okay. How to begin task 1. There's a template found under template materials. You can use my template or you can freehand it if you want to. There's helpful hints documents. Again, if you already have led a PLC, just tell us what you did. If you didn't, you can form a quick little PLC. And then, look at your school, tell us the story of your school profile. Complete your PLC research with a minimum of 3 sources. I don't care if it's but one. If it's one, it's got to be Richard DeFore. We know that DeFore is the PLC guru. You folks know all this stuff. And make sure that you got norms. We're going to meet this time. We're going to talk only about student scores. You know what norms are. What does good PLC look like? How is a good PLC conducted? What are the norms? What does research say on how you should set these up? Select your team, conduct your meeting, write an APA, and start your data dive. All right, so that's how you do task 1. I'm closed out. All right, and so let's see. And I didn't open them all up, so I wanted to make sure that you can see them. So right here, templates and materials. I've got, here's your helpful hints document, how to begin task 1. I've got PLC norms if you need to see those. I've got DeFore's documents if you don't know where they are. Here are all those things. How to do an annotated bibliography, how to do a literature review, gap analysis document if you don't know how to do a gap analysis. And then we've got a series of PowerPoints on each one of these, by the way. Dr. Hamilton did this one. They're short. This one's only 6. How to go about the actual steps of going about how to do task 1. What your school show profile should have, your prompt, what is it? What's it supposed to look like? How to select your PLC, how to lead it, and then how to do your references for APA 7. So that's task 1. Task 2. Facilitate to determine what strategies will you use to collect data. What will be your priority when you do? What's the criteria for selecting your most pressing need? What process will you use to look at your data? Again, we're looking at our standardized test scores off of our report card. What are we doing here? Collaborative data. How did the PLC collaboratively examine and disaggregate the data sets? What subgroup did you? What historical data? What growth data did you look at? Your most pressing need. What were the findings? Why did you determine it was the most pressing need? Clearly identify it. And you can show a graphic as to what you looked at that when you picked your most pressing need. This one was science grade level proficient, and we show that this is why we picked what we did. Again, from the report card, some different examples. Include a summary statement and clearly restate what your most pressing need is of your standardized test scores. And then do a little part that that you're going to explain this to the school leadership as to why this PLC picked this as the most pressing need. All right, and then task 3. Moving from the problem to a research-based solution. We're going to do some research now to find. So I'll give you an example. I'll stop my screen and I'm going to get some feedback from you now. All right. So let's say we're in elementary school and we disaggregated our reading scores, and we found out that our reading scores were bad. They're not good. We can't just say, well, we're going to work on reading. Well, what do you mean? We got to drill down a little bit further. Is it comprehension our problem or fluency our problem? So comprehension is that they're reading. They've mastered the physical act of reading. They just don't know what they read. They don't comprehend what they read. Or is it fluency? They can't read because of a language or other issue. So let's say it's fluency. We would research problems with reading fluency. What's the most common solution to that problem that schools employ? Phonics. And so we would look at research studies about schools that had problems with reading fluency most specifically, and what did they employ to address that? And we would talk about, well, it's phonics, and what did different schools do to address, with their phonics program to address the fluency issue. We're drilling down. We don't just identify, here's our problem, what are we going to do now? It's your job as a school administrator to find solutions or facilitate these PLCs to find solutions. Again, you may do this at the facilitator level, or even direct some of these at the AP level. But principal, you won't physically be doing this, but you got to know it's being done. And there's a document in there from before on the charge session on how you supervise as a principal, how you supervise these PLCs. You can't run them all, but you've got to be able to make sure that they are doing their data dives in every area of your school that's measured, that you've got a group that's doing a data dive and putting it out. Now, I want to stop that and not really shift, but think about how do we identify our most pressing need? We got to do a little gap analysis sometime as well, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you have a school, and there's 12 ESL kids, 12, and they're not proficient. But you've got a subgroup that's got 356 in it. Now, they're not as low as the ESL group, but they're lower than the school average. Let's say it's your Hispanic population, that subgroup, and they're lower than the school average, but there's 356 of them. What's your most pressing need? Those 12 ESL kids or those 356 of your Hispanic population? Gap analysis tells us it's number times gap. And so what that means is your school overall composite is 70. Your Hispanic kids are at 50. There's a 20-point gap. Your ESL kids are at 40. There's a 30-point gap. But we would multiply 20 times 356 versus 30 times 12. And our most pressing need would be that much larger group, because we're trying to move as many kids as we can to have as much impact on our overall school. And a word to the wise: don't pick your EC population. Don't ever pick your EC population as your most pressing need. Now, this is a part where we'll get to more specifically later this semester when we do our module on exceptional children. But tell me why we should never pick to put a program in place to improve their scores. Why should we never pick our EC kids? Let's go around. Siobhan, why should we never pick our EC kids?
Why should we never pick EC kids?
To try to put a program in our schools to affect their scores.
I mean, because of their different needs.
There you go. They're all on IEPs, aren't they? What's an IEP?
Right.
An individual education. Yeah. Beth, talk to us about that. I know you know that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because they're IEPs, it's all individualized. All their learning is basically personalized. If you put a program in place, you're lumping them all together and assuming that you're gonna meet everyone's needs with one program, and that won't happen.
That's violates federal law, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Federal law comes first. Remember that. Federal law, state law, local board policy, then performance, and then teacher input. Legally, that's how schools are run. Federal programs are the most restrictive because they pay not only for the program, but for the teachers as well. So don't ever say, well, our most pressing need is our EC population, and we're going to put a program in for them. No, you're not. Well, you will, but then somebody else will have to stop it when they fire you. Those are the kinds of things that again, I'm trying to keep you from losing your house here. The most important thing is we don't lose our house. That's the kind of thing that you got to know when you're putting this stuff together. Can we change a program for these folks? Don't recognize your intervention kids either, because we've now got MTSS. Who knows what MTSS is? Multi-tiered system of support now is the law of the land. What does that mean? Anybody know what MTSS is? All right, so teacher puts a referral in for a kid who's struggling in their classroom, either academically or behavior-wise, or both usually. Do we test them for EC services next week? Jessica?
No, sir. It's a process.
It's a process. It's a 90-day process, right? It's a 90-day process before we can come to a testing decision. In 2014, 11 principals were dismissed right before school started in Charlotte-Mecklenburg because they were doing that. When black males were being referred for intervention, they were testing them just immediately, sticking them all in EC so their test scores would hurt. Yeah, that happened. That's real. But the notion here is the first 30 days after the referral, you do anecdotals, which means you gather data on the kid. You go in the room and you watch them. You do that for 30 days. And at the end of 30 days, you come up with the first intervention plan. And you run that for 30 days. If it's being successful, you run it for 30 more. If it's not, you might change and do something for the second 30 days on intervention. So at the end, you've done 90 days before a testing decision can be made. That's federal law. That's how EC and intervention works. Now, as a principal, the EC department, they're responsible to do the head count and make sure that IEPs are being met, and the reevals and all those kinds of things. If something goes wrong with that, it'll blow back on you, but there's always a department chair or a compliance technician for the district or the EC people there. The intervention is a school-based committee. That means you're in charge as a principal, and so the intervention better go right, or it's going to come back to you. You say, well, all the things that you described, that 90 days you just described, that's all under the purview of the EC department. You know, how am I involved in this? Well, we've now gone to MTSS, which means we replicate that same 90 days before the 90 days. So it's now 180 days. Let me say that again. It's now 180 days. Every school district in North and South Carolina is supposed to be fully vested in MTSS. We got delayed a little bit because of COVID, but everybody's supposed to be fully vested, where we do 90 before the 90. For any kid that's struggling, we're supposed to do 90 before the 90. We do the same thing. We do anecdotals for 30 days in tier 1, tier 2. We put an intervention in. If it doesn't work, we go to a tier 3 intervention, and then we start the 90 for that. So it's 180 days. So we can't get involved with trying to do programs for either intervention kids or EC kids, because they're on a prescripted path. And once they have an IEP, we can't put them all, as Beth said, we can't lump them all together in one program, because it's an individual. That's what I stands for in the IEP. Let's think about real, now I'm clarifying my example here. Real AIG kids, not just the ones that are locally identified, but federally identified AIG, academically gifted kids. That's a federal program under exceptional children as well. Can we be changing what we do with them? They're not on an IEP, but they're on a what? They're on a PEP, right? A personalized education plan. Can we be lumping them together in some program? That would be no. So avoid intervention kids when you're looking for your most pressing need in your school to stay legal and not, lose your house. Avoid your intervention kids. Now, you're responsible as a principal to make sure that 90 before the 90 happens. The EC folks are to make sure the second 90 happens. But avoid your intervention kids. Avoid your EC kids in 504 that are on a disability plan. Same thing, can't be changed. Avoid your AIG kids. Don't even though these subgroups are parted out for you, avoid them, because you get into federal violations of federal law with them. So avoid EC, 504, AIG. Avoid those and your intervention. So that 5 subgroups are off the table. Now the question is what about ESL kids? That's a federal program as well. Can we put a program in for our ESL kids? Beth?
I'm not sure on that one. That's not one I've had a lot of experience with. I would almost feel like I would have to say no, because their levels are going to be different. So again, you're going to have to address their specific needs.
You can legally, but you shouldn't. This comes under one of those things as administrators that you're going to hear me reference every now and then. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Legally, you can, but Beth just explained why you shouldn't, because they're on different levels. They work off of a level system where they're trying to place out, and they advance by levels. Now, what you can do, and I know Gaston County does it, because the lady that does it was my doctoral student, finished May the 4th. That's what they're working on in elementary is some initial programs when they catch them early, but you can only do that early. You can't do that in secondary because they're in different levels. Now you can start them all and have a program for your initial ones, and that's what she's trying to do, but they place out of that pretty quickly. So you got to understand it can't be an ongoing program. Yes, you can have one when they first come to elementary school, but after that you must differentiate. So, yeah, you can have you can address your ESL, but only in elementary and only at the initial level. So it's very specific what you can do with that. So that's 5 things that you should avoid. So if those are things that you should avoid, tell me what you should pick. looking at, what areas should you focus on? Corey, what would you think? You're a high school man. What areas in high school should you focus on?
I mean, if you want to tie back into test scores, like as an English teacher, the English 2 EOC
There you
was
go.
kind of the main thing. And looking at not just the English 2 EOC, but you talk about honors level versus we have an Escalores program at our school. And looking at whether those students are being serviced in a particular way versus what we CP or whatever. And things you could do to not necessarily narrow that gap, but make sure that kids are where they should be to get the most help. Because one of the things we've noticed in our Escalores program is they get put in them in like 6th, 7th grade. And then by the time they get to 9th or 10th, maybe they shouldn't be, or some others that should, but they're kind of on this track.
Yeah.
And if tracking students in middle school is really the best way to kind of make the high school kind of classes fit as far as like size and performance.
Yeah. Now, one of the misnomers I don't know all the nomenclature, but I actually had a conversation yesterday. I'm not making this up. I had a conversation yesterday about English in high school in South Carolina. And one of the misnomers that the person was talking to me about is CP. We assume that means college parallel or college prep. That's what people think, but that's actually more of a general group of students.
Yeah, we actually used to have a tech prep level below that, but I think whether it was parents or government didn't like that kind of nomenclature or that kind of misnomer of tech prep versus college prep. Well, all kids should be able to go to college, so they kind of got rid of it. Now it's definitely more of a general ed level where you have some English language learners in those classes that have been in the country for 4 months and are having to take the same test. And you also have some kids that should be in either honors or gifted and talented that are just lazy. And it's like they know that those classes don't require as much work.
That's exactly right. And so that's your problem area in South Carolina in English is that CP level. That would be, if I was picking, that'd be the group that I'd be looking at for the exact reason that Corey just talked about. I would be running some kind of a program where I would herd out the ones that needed to be there versus the ones that just want to be there so they can hang out and under the radar. If you want achievement, you can't create places like that in your school schedule, in your school, that basically works against achievement. That's the misnomer of that CP, the college parallel or college prep. It actually does the opposite for a lot of kids. It lets kids who should be accelerated find a place where they can just hang out under the radar and not achieve. That would be my focus. If looking at those test scores, and they're going to be low to middling because of that. Either the kids need help. We got to figure out which ones need help and which ones need to be, that need to be kicked in the seat of the pants. That's what we're talking about when we do our data dives. We can't just look at the test scores and say, all right, here's the scores, and we'll pick the why. We got to drill deeper, like Corey just did. Why are the scores just low to middling with that group? Well, we got some over here that are first time, second language kids. And then we got some over here that, are trying to duck doing any work. And we got to find a solution for both of those. Those are two completely different solutions for the same group. It looks like one problem, but it's not. Corey just identified it's actually two problems. That's the drill down piece that we have to be able to do as a principal to understand why they're like they are. Jessica, talk to me about elementary school.
For us, we're doing relay right now. And they have like a whole system for doing data analysis when we look at our test scores. So we kind of drill all the way down to those subgroups. So we start talking about things like our Native American population, and then our African American population, and then our boys versus our girls. And we drill it all the way down to there, and then we find out, is it more informational text that they're having problems with, or is it more literature text? And then we take it even farther than that.
Yes. Now, what I wanted to highlight is the dichotomy here. Y'all are opposite ends of my screen here. I wanted to highlight the dichotomy. In high school, it's more content driven. It's more demographic driven when you drill down in elementary school. And middle school is kind of in between. But we don't do the same kind of data dive in every level of school. The data dive in high school is content driven. The data dive, and I'm pointing to Jessica in my lower part, the data dive in elementary is more subgroup, it's more demographic, it's more racial, it's more gender based. You got to understand that. If you don't, you won't be successful with, if you don't identify the right problem for the right reason when you're looking for your most pressing need, you won't, you won't stumble into the right solution. So Jessica's exactly right. We've adopted a format on how to do these things. And you've got to work that format, but understanding you can't say, well, they're doing it differently over here. I like the way. No, there is a specific way to do a data dive in an elementary versus a high school. And middle school is the worst of both worlds, unfortunately. You got to do both there. It's got to be content driven in middle school, and it's still subgroup. Demographic subgroup driven in middle school. That's why middle school is so hard. I'll just tell you right now, the hardest place to do your data dive and get kids to move is in middle school, because you have to be able to marry both of those techniques together in your data dive to come up with the proper solution. That's why I don't recommend that developing school administrators start in middle school. It's just not the best place to start. Now, full disclosure, I am not a middle school fan. I've done middle school. I've done junior high school. I much prefer junior high school myself. But now that's not the way we've gone. And people say, well, Dale, why in the world did you did middle school? Why you're not a middle school fan? I did junior high as well. And I can tell you why. And this is the big reason why. Prior to accountability, middle school was fine. After accountability, middle school was not fine. And here's why. Too much emphasis placed on social development in middle school versus academic achievement. I don't think there's anything wrong with social development. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to develop self-esteem in kids. But I like the junior high model, which is middle school is we should give kids self-esteem. You can't give anybody self-esteem, but you give the opportunities to earn it. Junior high is about performance. It's about giving kids the opportunities to earn self-esteem through performance. Middle school has always just been focused on self-esteem. Just tell them to feel better about themselves. That you're okay, I'm okay, all that stuff. You remember that back in the day? That was an actual program. You're okay, I'm okay. We can't give people self-esteem. They have to give them the opportunities to earn it. But now that middle schools that focus on achievement, I have no problem with. But if they're just focused on self-esteem and fitting in, and stopping bullying, and all that, and we want to do all that stuff, but if we do that to the exclusion of performance, what Corey said is when they come out of middle school, they've been tracked. They get to high school, they're just dumb as a cake of soap. What are we going to do now, hero? They haven't learned anything, and they haven't learned how to learn. That's not been an emphasis. Making them feel good about themselves was the emphasis. That's not going to happen in high school. You're going to be, you're going to be in the dumb class in high school if you didn't learn anything in middle school. You're going to be tracked, and there's not a lot we can do to help you. We can't catch you up all those years. We can't all of a sudden flip a switch and now you understand that it's all about achievement when you get to high school. You get left behind. Middle schools that focus too much on the social, emotional aspect of schooling and not on the achievement part, those kids don't succeed at the high school level. And that's one of the reasons I'm an advocate for junior high is those ninth graders. We need senior highs where when they get to us in the 10th grade, they know what the deal is. They've had a transition year. That's why a lot of districts have gone to ninth grade schools. Where they can transition them out of that middle school, I'm okay, you're okay, social, emotional, and get them to understand that school's now about achievement. And so a lot of districts have gone to ninth grade academies for that very reason. Well, we used to do that. We called it junior high school, where we had them 2 years in basically a middle grade, but when they went to the ninth grade, we transitioned them to the idea of high school. It was a completely different deal. We did it all in one groove. Now they've separated them out. Now that's fine with me as well. But if you send kids strictly out of middle school to high school and they haven't made that transition from social emotional performance, that their high school years are not successful academically. These are the kind of things you've got to drill down on when you're looking at that data and understand that the same things don't work in the same places. And we have a different emphasis in elementary than we have in high school. When we're looking for our most pressing need, we have to understand that the drill down is different. The drill down is different. And we have to match our population, who we got, to our techniques. One size does not fit all in this one. This one size fits nobody. So remember that. And then in task 4, let's get back to our task. So that's task 3. And it's a little more complicated, as I said, than it initially looks. So in task 4, this is the South Carolina Improvement Framework. Kathy used this one for this one. So in task 4, we're going to develop an action plan for the identified problem. And this is kind of the graphic organizer that we use, and we use this one for a reason. All of our evidence is, except for the OMA, which, the bottom line on it's the actual schedule. They all produce an action plan at the end. We take all these along with our master schedule. We put them all together at the end, and that becomes our school improvement plan. The school improvement plan's got to have specific activities. What are we going to do? Timeline. When are we going to do it? It has to identify who's the responsible person to make sure it gets done. This is all real. As a school principal, you have to produce a document, a graphic organizer that has all this stuff in it that says who's going to do what, where, and when. The resources that we need. Now, resources are the people and the money. Now, here's the rule in North and South Carolina. You can't put anything in your school improvement plan that you don't have people and money in hand to run. You can't put something in there with we hope to get a grant to do this. Well, then hope's not a plan. If I hope you hear me say that 1,000 times this semester. Hope is not a plan. School administration works off planning. We do not put anything in our school improvement plan that we don't have both the money and the people in hand to run. That's hard and fast rule. That's state rule, both states. So if you turn yours into your district, they'll send it right back to you. Can't do that. You don't have the money. Well, we're gonna get this, or we're gonna raise the money, or we're gonna hope, or we got a grant cut. No, then no, it can't go in your school improvement plan. You've got to have money and people on hand to run it. It's got to be real. It can't be theoretical. We might can run this. My hair might grow back. It's possible. It's just not probable. I get up every morning and run to the mirror. Did my hair grow back today? Nope. Well, it's always tomorrow. That's hope, folks. That's not a plan. We can't run schools on hope. They won't let us. Now, here's the real learning part of this section. The difference between the last 4. This is the higher level stuff that I'll bet you folks already know, that a lot of my new MSA folks don't know. The first time masters, the second time many of them do. They don't know the difference between formative and summative assessment, a goal and an indicator of success. So let's work through these quickly. Formative assessment is fidelity checks. Who and how are you going to go to the rooms and make sure that whatever program that you're running is actually being implemented with fidelity? It's not an assessment of the students. It's not giving them a test at midterm and then the summative be the end of grade or end of course test at the end of the year. Formative assessment is of the adults. Are they putting the program in that you want them to put in? Like reading 3D. You say, well, we're doing reading 3D to improve our reading comprehension. Who's going to the rooms and checking? So here's my story on that. right over here is Cornelius Elementary. Well, just south of it, a mile or so away, is they built a new elementary school. So when I was principal at Eastway Junior High, I hired a young man named Ray Giovanelli. And what I would do on a semester basis is I'd put my young people on a radio that thought they might want to be, we call them assistant to the principal, get them out of the classroom for a semester and let them chase kids, drag the line, as we called it back then, and see if they wanted to be administrators. And they now call that dean of students in Charlotte. Back in the day when I started, it was called assistant to the principal. Ray was one of those, and he decided he wanted to do that. He went back to Charlotte, he got his administrative credential, he worked his way up, and so he opened the new Washington Potts Elementary School over here in Cornelius, North Carolina, at Lake Norman. Charlotte Meck's always ahead of the curve, and they put RTI in response to intervention. They put an RTI program in back years ago. And before we'd even knew what MTSS was, it's one of the tenets of MTSS is to do that response to intervention, group the kids, and reteach. So he had RTI. And so the first 3 years the school was open, his reading scores were 80, 80, and 80. So Ray called me. He said, Doc, can you come over? I said, sure, Ray. He said, I'm concerned that, 80 is good, but we've got this response to intervention, which is a part of MTSS as we know now, but back then it was a standalone program. We've run this for 3 years and our scores is exactly the same. Can you come over here? I said, sure, I'll be glad to come. So I went over there, walked around, put my suit on, look respectable. And I said, let me walk around a little bit, Ray, see what I can see. Where's, your RTI course. So I walked around the room a bit. And I went down, finally found the RTI coordinator's office, and I talked with her, engaged her. She was a nice lady. And I said, how are you sure that these teachers are teaching these prescripted lessons? They teach a lesson on reading, and then when they assess, certain kids got it, and certain didn't, and so they would regroup. Flexible grouping, y'all know that. Y'all are CNI people, y'all know that stuff better than I do. And then one teacher would do the prescriptive lesson, the other teachers would, go to PE or, they'd go to specials or whatever. And I said, how are you sure that teacher is reteaching that prescriptive RTI lesson to that group of kids that didn't get it in reading? She said, well, I have them fill out a log and turn it in. I said, do you go to the room and watch them? Oh, no, I don't have time to do that. So I, pleasant conversation. I just walked back up to the office. I'd been there about 20 minutes at that point. I said, Ray, I found your problem. He said, you've been here 20 minutes. He said, how in the world? I said, they aren't teaching those prescriptive lessons. They'd have told me that before I came. That if you've been doing something for 3 years, there's no treatment here. You understand how a t-test works is we do a pre-test, we have a treatment, which would be the prescriptive lesson, then we do a post-test. I said, if the pre and the post are the same, that I knew before we came, there's no treatment happening. I just didn't know how. I just came to find out why the treatment wasn't happening. Y'all all had doctoral statistics. You know what a t-test is. Pre-test, treatment, post-test. I said, it's pretty simple. The previous year's test served as your pre-test. Then you were supposed to have an RTI as your treatment or intervention during the year. Your post-test was, this year's EOG in reading. Pretty simple research design. I said, there's no treatment happening. Nobody's going to see if they're doing those. So I'm guessing they're giving out worksheets, grading papers, and mad that they had to do that when everybody else got to go to specials or take them out to the recess. They aren't teaching the lessons, right? It's pretty simple. I don't have to be here to see this. So the notion of formative assessment is you got to be in the rooms doing walkthroughs and observations to make sure that they are implementing whatever program it is, they're implementing it with fidelity. That's the whole notion here. That's formative assessment. I used it. And I'll tell a bad story on me. I was an elementary principal. Every year we'd get a new textbook adoption for reading. The guys from the warehouse would bring it out in a little green van and, wheel it down to the book room. We'd unlock it. They'd roll it in there. Books that sat there all year long. At the end of the year, when they take the California Achievement Test, we'd say, well, that reading adoption wasn't any better than last year's. Made the same scores. We didn't even pass the books out. What are you talking about? It wasn't the reading adoptions problem. It was a fidelity problem. We didn't make sure that they were using those new books. That's what formative assessment is. And then of course summative assessment is the state test. That's why it matters. That's why it's on the report card. That's going to be the measure. Is that summative evaluation is when we give them the test at the end of the year. Did we move them or not? Did we grow them? Did they move? Did our test scores go up? That's our summative assessment. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that something formative is we give them a test at midterm and then summative is at the end of the year. Formative is of the adults. And then what is our goal? Well, we want all of our kids at 80. We want our school reading scores to be at 85%. That's our goal. What if they're at 65? Is it possible without cheating to move 20 points from 65 to 85 in 1 year? That's 4 standard deviations, by the way. 4 standard deviations. Everybody understands the normal distribution. The standard deviation is the average distance from the mean. All students fall within 99.7%. Within 99.7% of all students fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean. 2. There's always outliers at either end, but 99.7 of all students, 99.7 fall within 2 standard deviations of the mean. Is it possible to get 4 standard deviations in 1 year? It's possible. It's not probable. Chances would be 1 billion to 1 that you could, again, the tails of the normal distribution curve can never touch the x-axis. So that means if it touched, it means it'd be impossible. But now it can be so close that you can't blow smoke between it. That's what I tell students all the time. So we can never say never. There's always one chance. It's how many in how many? 1 in a billion that you could get 4 standard deviations. You say, but we're at 65. We want to be at 85. Yeah, our goal is 85. Our indicator of success would be how much growth would we need to see in 1 year for that to be successful. That should never be more than 1 standard deviation. Never be more than 1 standard deviation. That'd be 5 points. So if we were at 65, our goal, our indicator of success, if we got to 70 this year, man, we've had a great year. 5 whole points. Administrators, one of the biggest mistakes that I see young administrators make is they come in, they're all a ball of fire, their energy, we're going after it, they're trying to motivate. We're going to move our scores from 65 to 85. No, you're not. Look, and you're setting yourself up and your faculty for failure and for them to feel bad that, they worked their tails off all year and got to 70, but you didn't reach 85. We failed. No, you didn't. You got to be smart enough to know 1 standard deviation, 5 points. That's your indicator of success. My wife is a C. I told you my wife's one of y'all, right? She's a CNI lady. I learned over 40 years that they're much smarter than us on the LS side. I freely admit that. Don't hurt my pride or ego a bit. The EDCI folks are a lot smarter. So here's your pop quiz on what we just covered. My wife's high school, where she went to high school, it shall remain nameless, but where she went to high school, they were an upper middle class community. There was 3 high schools in the county. Let me set this up for you. It's a fairly low wealth county. 3 high schools there. And like a lot of rural places, there is no pupil assignment like in more urban places. It's where you live is where you go to school. There's 3 high schools in the county, and like most rural counties in western North Carolina, there's a county seat. And what do you have in the county seat? You have the hospital and you have the courthouse. So you have the doctors and lawyers, and the Indian chiefs are there. So their high school always was the best high school that I actually taught there. I remind her of that quite frequently. I actually taught there when I was a high school teacher, but always scored 75%. Always. From beginning of testing, scored about 75% proficient in high school as a composite. But we had the doctors and lawyers and Indian chief kids. We had the best kids in the county. That's just the way it works. Small rural counties. Her high school was the middle high school, middle to upper middle class, but not the doctors and lawyers kids, not the upper class kids. They always scored 65. And then we had the third high school was where all the working people, the mill people, farmers, the factory worker kind of people, they always scored 55. They scored 75, 65, and 55 from the beginning of time in testing, based on their populations. Remember, composite scores, comparative accountability is not about what you do with them, it's about who you got. And in rural places, they do not manipulate who you got with pupil assignment. If you live here, you go to school here. Naturally occurring population. Very important, right? When we talk about populations and sample, remember back to 736, populations and sample. So naturally occurring populations, but not all the same. Low, middle, and high. All right. Hired new principal at the middle, the middle achieving school, the 65 school. First year, they jumped from 65 to 85 on their test scores. Wow. It's a miracle. People came just like the, Shroud of Turin. People came from all over the world, like the water stain of the baby Jesus on the wall. People come to see the miracle. And they all walked away saying, we don't get it. We don't see their emperor's clothes. We just saw a bunch of kids, sitting and talking quietly, and the teacher not even really up instructing. We can't figure this out. They did that 3 years in a row, outscored the upper school. Scored 85, 85, 85. The other 2 schools still 55, still 75. But that was when the state they were sending the test out 2 weeks before the test. So you could do makeups, and it made it easier. Not like in the day when I was high school principal, when you went pick the test up yourself that morning and had to turn it back in at lunch every day. Tests were on campus for 2 weeks prior to the test, the actual physical test. You can see where this is going. They were just getting the test, making a copy of it, turning it into a study guide, passing it out to the kids. Everybody knew that. There was no miracle. You go watch it. Teacher's not even teaching. The kids are sitting there quietly on their phones or talking among themselves. They're waiting on the study guide to come 2 weeks before the test. Life is good. Except Common Core came along. Common Core came along and they said, no, it's not going to be, the test will be the same and all that, but we're going back to the standard rules of Common Core for reliability. Validity is about, does the test measure what it says? Reliability is how you use it, how you administer the test. And we're going back to the old rules. You'll get the test day of. So they got the test the day of, just like everybody else did. So now, here's the pop quiz. The low school scored 55 again. The high school scored, the upper level school scored 75 again. What did the school in the middle that had went from 65 to 85 because they were passing out tests as a study guide 2 weeks before. What did they score on the end of course as a composite that year? Remember, they went from 6 without changing the teachers or the kids or the attendance boundaries. They jumped 4 standard deviations and held that for 3 years in a row. What happened when all of a sudden they didn't get the study guide, the test 2 weeks before the test? What did their test scores do? So I'm gonna go around here. All right, remembering they went from 65 to 85. What happened to the test scores? And the other two schools scored 55 and 75 as they'd been scored. Siobhan, what happened to the test scores at that school?
They went down.
Okay, how far down did they go?
55, 65.
Did they go back? Did they go all the way back down to 65? Did they go below 65?
Below 65,
How far below?
55.
Okay, so Siobhan's guess is 55. Corey, did they go up, down, back to 65, below 65? What did they do?
I agree with Siobhan. They might even been below the lowest performing one because they weren't learning anything.
Okay, so he says below 55. All right, it's like Price is Right. We're just dollar above here. All right. So Corey says, Siobhan says 55. Corey says 54. All right, Jessica, what's your guess?
I'm thinking they probably went down too,
Okay,
probably below, I would think. But at the same
53.
time, well, maybe at the same time and having a study guide, you are kind of learning something by studying the studying guide.
But you know, they didn't have the test. They just had to use just a regular study guide. So, you
I
know,
still think
above 55 or below?
I'm gonna say below.
Below. So she says 53. So we got 55, 54, 53. Beth?
I'm gonna say that definitely that they went down, and to kind of go off of Jessica that they can study the study guide and learn it. But did they really learn anything, or did they just memorize? So I'm gonna go extreme and say 40.
Wow.
Jeez.
All right.
I'm gonna be the outlier.
No, okay. You're all right. They went down, but they went down to 28.
Oh,
I said 28.
I win. I was the closest. I get to go up on stage.
They went down to 28% proficient.
Wow.
They fell from 85 to 28. They removed the principal immediately. And I spoke to the superintendent. And I said, why did you let this go on like this? I said, Janet, you knew. Now, full disclosure, I have to tell the truth here. Janet's my first cousin. And so I said to Janet, why in the world did you let this go on for 3 years? She said, I didn't have any choice. So the school board, that we were afraid of what blowback we'd get in terms of college scholarships, not graduating. What happened this past summer because of COVID? Kids didn't get enough hours of learning that made them go to summer school, couldn't graduate. She said it would have blown us up. The state would have been here investigating. They'd invalidated our scores. We would have had kids that didn't graduate. I said, but you can't do stuff like this. You just can't.
But in the end, did it not? But in the end, when it did that not invalidate what previous year's work was?
Yeah, it did. They got whipped on that when it did happen. When it fell, they got whipped. But they claimed, and that's when one political party started screaming and yelling about Common Core was bad. Well, but what it did, what Common Core did. Common Core was the same thing we've been doing. It exposed all the cheaters, and they banded together and screamed, critical race theory and everything else they could think of to try to throw Common Core under the bus. But what Common Core, it wasn't the test. It was because we had so many schools across the state that were cheating in that 2-week period. And so that was the explanation rather than saying we were just cheating like dogs. It was easier to throw the test under the bus, but it wasn't the test. It was the administration of the test that did that. But it amplifies the notion here that you can't go up 4 without cheating. And so to put down that you're going to go up 4 standard deviations is you're either going to cheat or you're going to wear your teachers out, and then you're throwing them under the bus is what you're doing. They're the ones that pay the price on it. So what was happening at the school is they would all just behave themselves all year long and wait for the test 2 weeks before under the guise of it being a study guide. And when it didn't come that year, I mean, you hadn't taught all year long. I mean, you just warehoused them for a year. And so, but the notion here is you got to be realistic. I can lose weight one of two ways. I can either work out and eat better, or I can reach down and turn the wheel on the front of the scale. But that's not reality, folks. I mean, that's what they were doing. They were just giving them the test, But that kind of stuff happens, but you can't be a part of that. Good teaching and learning is what's got to happen. That's what we're talking about. Creating a culture of teaching and learning. You don't have to resort to turning the wheel on the front of the scale or passing the test out 2 weeks before the test. But on the other end of that, you can't be unrealistic and tell your teachers that I expect you to move kids 4 standard deviations in 1 year either. It's all part of it. It's all wrapped up together here. But that's the whole notion here. When you build an action plan, it's got to be actionable. It's got to be realistic. You've got to have the money. You've got to have the people. You've got to have a system to make sure it's being implemented. You've got to know what your test is. It's going to be the EOC or EOG. You've got to know what your goal is. We're trying to get to 85, but it's got to be realistic. It can't be, because if you don't do it as a school, teachers will do it as individuals. If you tell them they got to move their kids 4 standard deviations, they'll find a way to cheat. You're forcing them to cheat. The notion here is this. You're handing them the old joke about, you're handing them a lit stick of dynamite. You're going to fish or you're going to complain. 2 fellows are out fishing. They're not catching anything. One reaches his tackle box, pulls out a quarter stick of dynamite, lights it, and throws it in the water. Boom. You know what happens when you do that? The fish float to the top. He got his net out and just started scooping them up. The other fellow said, that's against federal law to do that. So I'm going to tell on you. Okay. So the first fellow, he reached in the tackle box again and pulled out another quarter stick of dynamite. He handed it to the complaining fellow and said, here, you're going to fish or you're going to complain. Well, when, the metaphor here is when you tell teachers they've got to move kids 2, 3, 4 standard deviations, you're handing them a lit stick of dynamite. Either you're forcing them to cheat. That's the whole notion of a school improvement plan. Is it's got to be realistic. It's got to be doable, and that's what the folks at the central office are checking. Have you got the resources to do this? Is it a reasonable expectation that we can do this along the way? So that's the whole notion of action planning in the school. It's got to be realistic. It's got to be legal. It's got to be actionable. You got to have the resources to do it. And then, of course, the fifth of the task in the APSEL is to look at those competencies, the 21 competencies, and tell us, which of these you're competent in from the things that you did. You don't have to produce artifacts, but you write a little narrative for each one of them. There's an example in there of how you write a little narrative. I did this, and that made me competent in communication or conflict management. That's number 5. But the heart of this thing is that action plan. That's the payoff for school administrators, because that same process becomes that section, that academic piece for our school improvement plan. And it's got to be realistic. It's got to be actionable. It's got to be real. It can't throw teachers under the bus. It can't throw you under the bus by violating federal law, by picking the wrong group and trying to do, like Beth said, a program for kids that are supposed to be individualized. It can't be you're using the high school metric for elementary school or vice versa. All those things have to, that I've sat here and bored you with for the last hour, have to be a part of that. You got to be thinking about all these things when you develop that action. Not as easy as it looks. And it's a lot more complicated, and there's a lot more moving parts. But that's the APSEL. Again, If you've done these things, just write and tell me about it. If you haven't, then you can kind of follow the template. But you can use the template and tell me what you've done in the past. I'm quite sure y'all have done all this. But again, there's a process of how you get test scores, how you get achievement in school. I've just outlined that process. It's not hope. Hope is not a plan. You know, it goes back to the story I told Wednesday night. You can't just hire teachers and send them down the room and hope. You know, I hired her. What did you do past that? You've got to have more impact than that. As Corey said, he wants to have a broader impact in schools. He wants to influence more people. This is what we're talking about. This is how you do that. This is the guide. We start with the academic piece. If you can plan your work and work this plan that I've covered this morning in the app cell, you can create a culture of teaching and learning in your building. That's primal. That's primacy. That's the most important thing. Every day is those kids and those scores and achievement, kids learning. To end this section, what do they do at John Sausage? They make sausage. What do we do in schools? We teach kids. We'll be back on at 11:50. We'll take a 15-minute break. Thank you again. I always do. All right. So looking at the OMA, again, we do task and prompts. I've got OMA task and prompts, and I've got a template for you to use because you won't have a template on this one, but the template's pretty basic. So when people say, what's the purpose of the OMA, Dale? Well, the purpose of the OMA is not to build a master schedule and duty roster and supervision schedule. The purpose of the OMA is to build a legal master schedule, duty roster, and supervision schedule. This is where the law part kicks in. All right. Because there are state limits on class size. There's federal law on how you can deal with all your special POPs programs. Remembering your special POPs programs that you'll have to do an audit on are EC 504, your intervention kids, career and technical education, AIG, ESL, all of those, and Title I. If you're in a Title I school, all of those are federal programs, federally funded, not only the program, but the actual teachers. And that leads me to, I'll stop my share and do a story right quick. So looking at where you folks are from, let's see, Jessica would be the one that would be probably the most likely to know what I'm talking about here. If Jessica left her house and just headed toward the coast, she'd eventually have to cross 40. She's 95. Then 40's on the other side of that, heading toward the coast. And about midway between Wilmington and Raleigh, that area, if you're going across from like where Jessica is, you'd be heading toward Topsail. So I went and visited a school down in Chinquapin. And I was only about 30, 35 miles from Topsail, but you leave 40, and I mean, it's so far out in the sticks, your GPS just sets and spins. When I went to this school, they were working on the road, and I had to go up a man's driveway and through his carport and out the backside to get to the school. It's relevant to the story in that this is not the beaten path, folks. I'm telling you, you got to want to get there to get there. So when I got there to meet the principal at this little elementary school, I had to wait an hour because they were having a Title I audit. Well, after the hour wait, I met the principal, and then of course I had to go back 2 weeks later to meet the new principal. He was, the Title I audit was there. So the notion is that he didn't follow the rationale for the master schedule. He reversed it and put teacher input first and federal programs last. That's not how it works. And so knowing the rules on Title I are very important. There are two types of Title I's. There's Title I school and Title I program. It's determined by the number or the percentage of free and reduced lunch in your building. If you have at least 50% of your kids, but not more than 80 or not 80, you are a Title I program. That means federal government sends you the money for your program and for your teachers, but only the Title I kids can share in that. That means you can't put non-Title I kids in those classes, and when you spend the money, it can only be spent on Title I kids. Now, if you have 80 or more percent of your kids are on free and reduced lunch, you're a Title I school. That means everybody's Title I, even if they don't qualify. So you can spend, any kid can go in any class, Title I. And money can be spent, school wide. Those are the kinds of things. Now, that's what you have to know, whether you're a Title I program or Title I school. Well, this was a Title I program. So only Title I kids could go in the Title I teachers class. Well, the third grade teachers got mad and marched in mass down to the principal's office and said, wait a minute. Said, we've got 30 or more in our room and she's got 15. We want the load distributed even. And they pitched a fit and showed their behind until he relented and moved. I think he moved about 20 non-Title I kids into the Title I teachers class. So what did she do? She picked up her cell phone and called Raleigh and said, I'm being held accountable for the test scores of these kids. I've got 20 kids in my room that aren't Title I. Well, they didn't just randomly pick that school in the middle of nowhere for a Title I audit. There was a reason why they were there. And so those are the things you kind of got to know when you're putting your master schedule together. So let's look at master scheduling, which starts the OMA. So let's look at what you got to have in order to do your master schedule and in order to do the OMA. And then I'll show you this first and then we'll go to that piece of it. So, the OMA is the actual name of the evidence that we're going to do for the second half of the course. Underneath OMA task and prompts, this is in our other shell, our 603 shell. I've got a PowerPoint on master schedule. And you need, again, I like to start with where we're going to end here so you get to have some context. Okay, this is an old one. So here's the notion, the path to school improvement is a triangle, folks. Our school improvement plan. That's what we're going to do and what we're going to improve. We build that. That's law. It says we have to build that school improvement. Well, the two cornerstones that hold it up are the school budget. If we say that, in our school improvement plan, we want to improve reading scores, are we putting our money, the money that we have in our budget behind reading scores? And are we scheduling the school so that we can get those reading scores? The master schedule and the school budget have to support the school improvement plan. I'll give you an example. I went to see Aquanetta at Hickory Grove. I got there and they were in a tizzy. It was June 11th, last day for teachers and administrators other than the principal was June 15th. This was a few years back, not too many. I went to see her on June 11th and they were just in a scramble. I said, what the world's wrong? She said, well, we got word Friday that we're going to implement Reading 3D district-wide, and we're going to have to move the time allotted in the master schedule we'd already had it completed from 90 minutes a day to 120 to accommodate the 30 minutes extra for this new reading program. That's what we're talking about. Their emphasis in their school improvement plan was reading. They had to align their master schedule. Again, that's number 3 on the rationale. Local board policy said we're going to do 120 minutes and implement this program. Well, they had to change that in order to meet their school improvement plan goals, which was to improve reading. So master scheduling, here's the things you will need, and this is what you'll need for your OMA, your report card, your EVOX report, your school improvement plan, the master schedule, the duty roster, supervision schedule. People ask me, what's the difference between duty roster and supervision? Duty is during the day. Lunch duty, car rider duty, hall duty, cafeteria duty. I mean, when those people are doing that, they can't be teaching, so that pulls them out of the schedule. And then supervision schedule is your evening. That's ball games and things that happen after the bell. Teacher working condition survey and your last accreditation report. This is what you will need. Now, here is the schedule. Here's the rationale for building a master schedule. Your federal law and programs have to come first. State law from the General Assembly, the State Board of Education, and Department of Public Instruction, that comes second. That's length of day, number of days, class size limits, all those kinds of things. And I have documents that will show you this. Then local board policy, like how many minutes of reading. Then best practices, your EVOS performance data of what teachers get, best results with what kids. And then the teacher input comes last. And then here are your federal programs. Exceptional Children, 504 and Intervention, Title I, are you a school or a program? English as a second language, gifted, and CTE. Again, those are your federal programs. You need to do an audit of those. Talk about that in a minute. Here's your state law. As I said, the things that are most relevant for scheduling a school is class size limits, highly qualified teacher licensure, hours, minutes, days of instruction, how much planning time, how much duty-free time, and teacher work days. Those are state laws that you cannot violate. They must be integrated into your master schedule. Local board policy talks things like this, like your daily schedule. Is it a block schedule? Is it a flex? Is it AB day, traditional, or mosaic? Mosaic simply means school. You run two schedules in the same school. Hours of instruction for each of those, the special programs that you'll have, clubs and organizations, and any local assessments that you have. Your best practices, EVOS comes, scheduling of your core and subject and EVOS school data. You need to factor those things in. Like if your school doesn't have full-time specials and they only come to your school at part-time, that's like PE or art or music, that has to be factored in. And then last is teacher input. And it should only be on school and student information, what kids shouldn't be together. It should not be, I want to teach this versus that. And, master schedule that doesn't positively impact the academic initiatives of your school improvement plan is the outcome of poor master scheduling process and did not occur by chance or luck. You get what you get. So that's where we're headed with this, is the master schedule. All right, how do you get there? Well, there's a process you go through. It's called the OMA to get how you build that master schedule. So let's look at those tasks and prompts. So overall, you examine the school and its context, both internally and external. We got to know about your community. That's where that accreditation report, it'll talk to your external or your community. This school was built in 56. This community has number of college graduates, the average income, the average price of the house. We put your school in context. We don't offer the same things at every school the same way. We have to have some external context in your school. And then you will assume responsibility for instructional capacity to improve student achievement. All you got to do there is just copy the first 4 tasks of your OMA. Of your app sale that you just did. We're going to do that one first, and it plugs in as task 2, where you're building capacity in your building. That highlights a thing that you're trying to improve. That should be reflected, of course, in your master schedule. And then 3, you build the schedule, and 4, you reflect on what you did. So you can see how these two dovetail together. You got to do the app sale first, because that's your closing the gap program that you're going to then implement into your master schedule. So task 2, you've already done it when we get there. That's why we don't do this first. And you can see the things that you need to do that one, you need to do this one. So that's why I said you need to be thinking ahead here. But this one is not hard after you do the first one. So what do you do in task 1? District, state, and federal policy laws that regulate procedures in place for student and staff. You analyze the current structures and procedures in terms of equitably and transparency. You do an audit of your exceptional learners, and you ask about your budgeting process at your school. Now that's the one where everybody kind of falls down. And let me spend a couple minutes on that. We want to know about the budgeting process at your school, not the budget or purchasing. A lot of times students will say, well, I talked to the school treasurer or the school secretary and this, we got to turn in purchase. No, I don't want to know about purchasing. I want to know about how does your school go about planning its budget? Is the school improvement team involved? Equity and transparency is through the school improvement team. Who is the school improvement team, by the way? There's teachers on it. There's community members, there's parents. If it's secondary, there's kids. And you get the power. Renita Griffin Jordan works with me. She's principal at City of Medicine High School in Durham. Dr. Renita is one of my former doctorals. She's working with me now. But she is so eloquent in her notion of you have so much more power when it's the team that made these budgeting decisions and not just you. When, budget, it doesn't mean we take all the money and divide it equally. Budgeting means that we have initiatives, we have special things that we want that we identified through the school improvement process. We want to put our money behind that. Now, everybody don't like that. We're going to put our money in math this year. Well, the science people are screaming, we needed new microscopes. We have the power of that diversity, equity in that school improvement team. That they should be involved in that budgeting process. Budgeting process is setting priorities. It's not how we spend the money, it's what we spend the money on. I don't care about the purchasing part, the accounting, that piece of it. Too many people think that's budget. No, how we buy stuff is not budget. What we buy is budget. Where we put our money. Did it follow our school improvement plan? That area that we identified that we said that we were going to try to close that gap. Are we putting our money in that or not? That's why that school improvement team is the ones in charge of that school improvement plan. And then they should be involved in the budget as well with the power. We said this was important. Let's put our money in it. And we schedule our school that way. We said reading was important. We put 30 more minutes in the daily schedule in the elementary school. If we don't put our money behind it, it's not important. If we don't change our schedule to accommodate it, it's not important, and it's not going to happen. We come up with that app sale, our most pressing need, what the thing we got to work on. We come up with the idea, but remember, we have to budget. We have to have a budget for it. And if we don't put it in our budget at the local level, it will not happen. If we don't schedule it, it will not happen. So the master schedule circles back to it's that piece, that corner in the budget that supports that school improvement plan. It's not just if every kid's got to be with somebody, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And we put our the teachers that get the best results, that teacher input part, that value added part, we put our best teachers. Now, I know everybody wants to teach the easiest kids, the upper kids. Some people don't do that as well. That's where we build capacity. What we tell teachers is I'm going to have, you can't teach this right now, but we're going to build capacity. Eventually you can teach that. It's not about time. It's about talent. That same lady I told that story on the other day about, I did hire her. First semester, I had her teaching general classes. At the end of the first semester, we worked with her. I put her teaching AP. She said, but I've only been here one semester. I said, but they're not any good. You're better than they are. They have time, but you have talent. We're all about talent here. Do you realize that the one that I'm replacing you with, he's taught AP for 5 or 6 years. He's never had not one kid make a 3 and pass the AP exam at the end of his course. Not one. He's over. He's over forever. You got to be better than him. I mean, we're going to build capacity in you. And then he was like, but I've been here the longest. I don't care how long you've been here. You're just as bad this year as you were the first year. Can't imagine why he left. But those are critical conversations you have to have with people. Now I said, if you'll work, we'll teach you how to teach AP. But first thing you got to do is quit teaching what you want to teach. I said, when was the Catholic Reformation? And he told me the years. I said, you realize that European AP don't even start until 100 years after that. You spend a whole year teaching something that's not even going to be on the exam. What are the chances these kids have to pass the exam? That'd be zero. No. You're malpracticing on them. I can't have that. People in central office put me here for a reason. It wasn't my sterling personality. No, they put me here because we're getting killed on test scores and we got capable kids. But, had to have the same conversation with the U.S. history teacher. I said, Dan, how many questions are on the Civil War on the U.S. history test? 2. What do you teach all year long? Civil War. And I said, and the sad part is they miss one of the 2 questions on the Civil War, and that's all you teach the whole year long. Why do you think nobody passes the U.S. history exam? He was one of those reenactors. So that's all he was interested in teaching. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. We got to get the right people teaching the right stuff. Who gets performance and who doesn't. Now, that doesn't mean that they're stuck in that forever. But, we got to be concerned about that. I mean, let's look at a couple of scenarios on that. I think I've got them. Let me share my screen. I've got to remember where I put it. I get old. Let me switch back to my other. Yep. All right. So EVOS, 0 means that you met. If you're up, if you get past 2, if you get 2 or above, then you exceeded growth. If you're below 2, on the scale, on this range, then you didn't meet growth. And they have it all parted out. But let's look at some. This is Robin's group, but let's look at some teachers. All right, can y'all see that? All right, let's look at teacher A. Who should she be teaching? Now, that doesn't mean that she has to do it forever. We're going to build a professional growth plan, remember? And we're going to grow these people into the teachers that we need them to be. But just looking at her data, her initial data there, she does pretty good with kids in the lower 2 quintiles and the upper 2 quintiles. But what about the middle kid? No bueno on them, right? And she's pretty consistent in that, isn't she? 3 years of data says that she can't teach the middle kid. Okay, let's look at teacher B. What does teacher B tell us? She's really good with the lower kids, but no bueno on the upper kids, right? So for these 2 teachers, I'd have teacher 1 teach the upper kids or teacher A and the teacher B teach the lower kids. And I can find somebody I can find somebody to teach the middle kids. That makes it easier. I can do that. That can teach to the middle of the room. I can do that. Now, I'd eventually like these people to be able to teach them all. I mean, we can look at their growth charts, by the way, here. We can see this. But eventually, I would like to be able to develop that teacher into somebody that could teach it, across all spectrums. But I have to be very intentional start with until I can grow that teacher where I need them to be. Again, it goes back to how we started this conversation today, the column. Get good people and get them in the right seats. That's what we're talking about. But what if we don't have any good people? We have to grow them. The Collins metaphor here is we can see what seat that these people need to be in. Teacher A needs to be teaching the upper kids. Teacher B needs to be teaching the lower kids. That's getting them in the right seat. But what if they can't do either? Then we got to grow them where they can teach either. And then, that's the notion here on the Collins metaphor is EVOS. And that comes in, and then teacher input comes last. So to schedule a school, we have to start with our federal programs because they're the most restricted and have the most guidelines. Then we have to make sure we follow our state laws on class sizes, what teachers teach what because of their certification and highly qualified. And then we have to go with our local policies in terms of how many minutes of this and what kind of schedule, flex, AB, that kind of thing. Then we look at who can teach what, with an eye toward we're going to grow them where they can all do it. But when you got Dan, we don't need him in U.S. history because all he knows is the Civil War. We got to find something else for him to do. If not for us, but for somebody else, you might have to find another career or find another school. If we don't have the capacity to do that. And then last comes teacher input. And teacher input is what kids don't need to be together. It's not about what I want to teach. They don't get to do that. In every school building, whether they'll admit it or not, there's a whiteboard somewhere that's gridded off for the master schedule. Now, I know they're supposed to do it by computer, but everybody knows you cheat, do it by hand to start with. And you have little yellow stickies. You have a little yellow sticky pad. I've got one here somewhere. And you write teachers' names. The trick is what names do you write? What squares do they go with? And it's not eeny, meeny, miny, mo. There's a process of how we do that. What teachers teach, what courses we put where and when. That's federal, state, local board policies, what courses we teach, where and when. And then the last two are what names we put on those teachers that go in those squares. So there's two functions to scheduling, setting up the actual matrix, and then more as importantly, what teachers we plug into those squares on that matrix of who teaches what, where, and when. So you have two functions here. So that's what we're trying to teach you. There is a process to a master schedule. It's not just random. It's not, and whoever develops your master schedule runs your school. I don't care what their title is. Whoever develops your master schedule runs your school. Because they're making all the actual relevant decisions that are going to impact the outcomes of your school, for good or for bad. Now you can delegate this, but you can delegate, the activity, but not the responsibility for the outcomes. You got to understand that. You can delegate the activity of master scheduling to somebody else, but you can't delegate the responsibility for the outcomes. That's going to only come back to you. So if your guidance counselor's doing it, you better hope she knows how to master schedule a school. If not, you're kind of hosed. Because it's not one of these things that, it's debatable. We could do it this way, or no, you can't. There's only one way to schedule school. I just taught you. One way, period. But there is no but, or that there's only one way. And we follow that rationale to the T. We start with federal programs. Then we go with state law. Then we go with local board policy. Then we go with performance statement, and then we go with teacher input. In that order, every time, always. Every time, always. Otherwise, you lose your house. Now, it's a hot topic of debate over in the unemployment line that there's a different way to do this. There's a reason why you in unemployment line argue that there's a different way. There is no different way. Remember when I said that I hurt people's feelings sometimes? This is the part of I was talking about. I'm not doing it intentionally. But you got to understand, if you get this wrong, you go home. You don't misspend, you don't break law but one time as an administrator, and you go home. You don't misspend money but one time, and you go home. I've had to have these conversations. We don't have an intermediate step on some things. Some things, if you get wrong, we can remediate, or we can fix, or we can move your. But these things, I have no relief for it. Don't make me or somebody like me who had to do this. Don't make us have to come out and have this and deliver this news. You don't want it for your life and your career and your family, but the people delivering it don't want to have to do it either. Because it makes you into a person you just don't want to be. And I'll tell you that story later. Again, another true story, but I won't bring us down today with that awful story. So, task one, we're going to do all our audits. We're going to look at our internal and external context. We're going to look at our are we doing school improvement like we're supposed to with the team? Are they involved in our budget? And then in 2, we're simply going to copy and paste what we did in the app cell. And 3, we're going to actually build our master schedule based on that master scheduling PowerPoint I just showed you. We're going to build a new master schedule. Now, if you're at a high school, you can build like the English department if you want to. But we're going to revise the existing master schedule. Now, there's no requirement that they do it, but you know, from what you've learned, what changes would you make? Or you know, elementary, you can reschedule the whole school if you want to. But the notion here is I'm not interested in implement, but that you understand that there's only one way to do it. That protects you from the blowback from some legal authority. There's only one way, and you know the sooner you acknowledge and accept that, the better off you'll be on that. So that's the OMA. So that's the 2 evidences, and you can see how they dovetail. And you know that if you know up front, you can do that. So now I want to take I actually finished that segment 6 minutes early. Look at me showing out today. I want to look at our weekly activities. I want to talk about them. You do need to get started on them. Yes, sir.
So we're taking our existing schools like Data and EVOS and stuff, and not necessarily like building a better mousetrap, but kind of looking at a way that it could be done. Because obviously our schools have a master schedule, kind of hopefully based on the same data, but we're kind of taking that and saying this is a more efficient way it could be done.
I love that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Because rarely as a school administrator will you walk in and just trash the old master the first year. You might, you're normally going to try to fix it a little bit the first year. So exactly right, Corey. That this again, you need to fix it the first year before you trash it and try to. In the second year, you might trash it and just do a whole new. But normally the first year or 2, what you do is exactly what Corey said. How can we build a better, how can we make this part of it better? And that's why I said elementary, you might have to redo the whole thing in elementary to make it better. But normally in high school, you don't. You just work on one piece of it. And I said, but again, just like we talked a few minutes ago, or I did, and you had to listen to me. When you're drilling down and looking at data, it's different from elementary. The perspective or the reason why you're doing it is different in elementary than it is in high school. Again, master schedule is different in elementary and high school. Elementary, you can devise a whole new schedule. High school, you really can't do that. You're working on smaller pieces. That's exactly right. That's just you got to remember those things. Different levels are different for a reason, and the activities are somewhat a little different as well. Speaking of activities, again, I want to be a little more intentional about going through the activities for the second half of the course so that you can be looking at them and maybe knocking some of these out for the first half. So let's look at let me share my screen, and I'm going to show you. Now, it's on our weekly schedule. I have them on the weekly schedule, but they're also in discussion board. But when we get so the only real activity I have you going out to and fro in the first half of the course is go talk to your principal about 3 things a new principal might know in order to be a successful, and what 3 leadership traits are critical for a successful principal. This is just an overview. I want you to get, and it also gets you out and gets you in the notion of learning about the principalship. But those are pretty easy.
Dr. Lamb, can I ask a question about that? So the school that I am mainly assigned to within the district, it's a brand new principal. Do you recommend these questions be asked of an experienced principal? Because I can pick an experienced one. Or is it okay to ask a first-year principal?
Well, see, now, since you asked me, I'm going to give you an answer you don't want to hear. Wouldn't it be nice as a researcher to talk to both of them?
Well, and I thought about that, but I didn't want to, I wanted to
volunteer for extra work. I know. Either one is fine, but boy, I'd love to know the difference, wouldn't you? I mean,
I would, and I do work with a school that I support consultatively, has an experienced principal, so I could ask both. And I was,
it would be nice to know the differing perspectives of a beginner and somebody who's, you know, has it changed? You know, do you see a difference in it? But either one or both is fine. But I'd
Okay.
love to know the difference. I really would.
I would too, because I would like to know what
Yeah.
what perspective of an experienced principal might think, and then the perspective of a new one. So
Yeah. But the reason I stuck this one in this half of the course, which we normally don't have you come and go into it and throw in this half of the course, is I want you to get a perspective from them of what the job is. And is this something that you really want to do? Or is it something that you want to work with? See, I've had students say, I don't want to be a principal, but I know that to be successful in what I do, I'll have to work with them. I need to know what they know. But, and then I've had people that come in and said, I never really wanted to be a principal until I got out and found out about it. Now I think I want to do that. Or I have some that come in from EDCI that say, you know, I had the idea I wanted to do this. And now that I've seen it and talked to people, well, I would do that if you paid me. And see, that's the whole notion here of getting you out early on and talking with them about it is they'll give you some notion of what it's really like. You know, full disclosure, it's been a long time since I've been a principal. You know, I did it for 17 years, but I didn't do it in the modern era. We still, you know, we still had horses and buggies and kerosene lanterns back when I did it. You need to talk to somebody that's doing it now. And that's what this one is about, is doing that. And then for the second half, as we look at the second half of our course, unfortunately, I'm not being facetious. Unfortunately, we have to start with school safety now. Full disclosure, I was a high school principal during Columbine and Jonesboro, Arkansas. I was a high school principal at that time back in the 90s. And so, you know, we've returned back to those times again. That was that was an awful year. Awful year. I can't even begin to describe it, and I won't. I'll just say it wasn't good. But unfortunately, we have to start with school safety now. It has to become primal when we start talking about operations. Remember, we're shifting from academic in the first half of the course to operations in the second half. You say, but Dale, you're just talking about how important academics was and test score. Yep, it is. That's why we cover it first. But remember, we're making a shift midway. We're shifting from academics to operations. And when we talk about operations, what's the most important piece? Safety. It has to be, unfortunately. Your school is required to have a school emergency crisis plan and a crisis box. Is it where it's supposed to be? Is all the stuff in the plan and all the materials are actually in the course shell for the first week that says what they're supposed to have. And then we have to, you know, early on need to find their budget. Does it have, you know, does the budget, do they spell out how they're spending federal, state, local, and school funds? What's missing? List the 5 most important steps in school-based budgeting process. That's kind of a rhetorical question. That's you ask that of your school principal. It doesn't matter what 5 they say. What matters is that they say 5, that they actually have a process of how they develop their budget. Just like how we do the master schedule, we have a rationale of 5. That's our process. Do they have 5 things that they do to put together their budget, or are they just, you know, we just talk about it? So again, it's not the actual 5 is not important. What's important is that they have 5 or a process to develop their budget. And you'll do a facilities walkthrough, a safety walkthrough. Legally, how many times you got to do a fire drill for a public school?
once a month.
Once a month. How many times do you have to do a safety walkthrough of your building?
No idea.
Twice a month. Nobody knows that. It's amazing. Which one of these will get you fired first? Not doing your safety walkthroughs, by the way. You got to do them twice a month by law. Twice a month, you got to inspect your facilities. And I mean, inspect them like the fire marshal does. I'm talking about traffic signs, car riders as your traffic separated. I mean, everything twice a month. Have to do it, state law, and document it. Why did how did the people get in the most recent awful school shooting was at Uvalde in Texas? How'd they get in the building?
A prop door.
Back door was propped open. That's one of the things that's on the list: chain door, prop doors. How'd they get in the classroom?
Unlocked door.
Unlocked door. Went on to say that, so that's one of the things you check, whether rooms are occupied or not. Are all the doors locked? Happened to be at Uvalde, the one that the door was unlocked because the lock on the door had been broken. They'd noted it several times. Didn't bother to fix it. I hate to say it, but those people lost their job, but that's not the end of it. You're talking about civil lawsuits against them. Prop door, broken door, knob on the door where the shooter went in and killed all the kids. It's not just the civil lawsuit, but think about if that was you. Think about what you carry with you every day. So that's why you do a facilities walkthrough. That's the kind of stuff you check. Our cars, parents are assholes, by the way, and pardon my language. But that's the only thing I can think to call somebody that would dive into the bus line, let their kid out because they're late for work. How many times have we seen that? Where we don't have anybody out there stopping and parents go driving into the bus lot, run over kids, or try to pass in the car line. Do you have all that stuff separated where the cars and buses can't mix, or you don't let the kids come walking across from the bus lot through the car line? Have you seen that? I saw that in school this summer. I was asked to assess a new school that opened. It's supposed to be, foolproof, protecting kids, had the card reader system, had the buzz to get in, unbreakable glass, the whole deal. It's down in below Siler City. New middle school had opened a few years back, and I went down there and I said, boy, this is an impressive place. I mean, this is like Fort Knox. You're not going to get in. And I said, but, and they said, well, what's wrong, Dale? You said this didn't pass. I said, well, I don't have to break in. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, right out here, right next to the school, you've got a playground, and I can drive right up to it, be within 20 feet of the kids, no fence, no obstruction. I'm right-handed. I sit on the left side of my vehicle. All I've got to do is turn with an AR. Back seat catches all my ammunition. I could kill every kid on the playground in probably 2 minutes. I could shoot 200 kids. 7 mags of ammo. I could probably shoot those out in a minute per mag. 7 mags, 7 minutes. I can shoot everybody on your playground, and within 4 minutes of leaving, I can be on a major interstate. You'll never find me. I don't have to go in the building. All I got to do is just drive up in the parking lot. You're allowing me access on a paved road all the way to your playground that's got no fence and completely unprotected. Why would I bother with the building? Why would I break into Fort Knox if all the money's sitting out on the front curb? I came after the money, not to get in the building. That's absolutely true story. I can't imagine why they didn't invite me back. But I mean, we can go to Google Maps and I can show you how crazy that is. Look at that. That's fine. Y'all do understand the point of the exercise was to keep the kids safe, not to make the building impregnable. But that's all they were thinking about. I was interested in the kids. I'm not. If I don't have to go in, why would I? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to be looking at your school when you do that inventory. And again, it is a state requirement that you do that twice a month. Fire hazards, is there stuff is there prop doors, is there chain doors? Some old dog, those old panic bar doors, do you chain them things? It's against the law to do that. All the stuff that we know better than to do, we have an inventory to go out and check that. You have to file it twice a month and write. Some districts have it already computerized where it's just an automated form. If your district doesn't have one, then you can use mine. But you got to check all that stuff. Are you in an old building that still has lockers? You know, there was a time where every kid in the world didn't carry a book bag bigger than him. I'm that old, and some of those old buildings are still around that have lockers. Are they all dogged down where you can't get in them? Those kinds of things, you have to assess your facilities. So you can see that about the inventory there with it. Pay particular attention to that. So that was the first week. Second week, interview somebody over in HR. You can do it on the phone or you can go over there. Now, there's 11 specific things that you have to do to hire somebody by federal law. EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission says that we have to do a good process. The question is not the 11 things. The question is who does the 11 things? Now, the dichotomy for me is I was principal in Burke County. I had to do it all. I was principal in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I didn't have to do any of it. It all got done in both places. It's according to, it's according to where you are. Who does it? You need to know that because it varies from district to district. Because again, you violate federal law, you go home. And the easiest place to violate federal law outside of exceptional children is hiring. Again, these are the hotspot things, folks. I don't have just random stuff for activities. I've pointed out the hotspot areas where you're most likely to make an egregious error that sends you home. Hiring outside of exceptional children, which we will cover as a whole module. Hiring's where feds get you. Did you do, did you advertise? Did you do references? Did you do background check? Did you do drug? Who does all this stuff? You got to know that. Also, employee assistance. I had a crack addict for a teacher. They knew it when they hired her. They hired her for a special program. She relapsed. I had her, but because she was in EAP, I couldn't let her go. I had to use a long-term sub for a whole year. Couldn't even hire for a permanent sub for a whole year. Could not let her go. Had to know that. Try to fire somebody in EAP, you get a lawsuit. So all your HR stuff, you need to find out about it. And then you need to find out about your intervention team and EC. What's going on at your building with intervention? How does it work? Are you doing MTSS, the 90 before the 90? Again, this is a place that gets you on intervention. And I'm going to remind you, you just have to attend an IEP meeting. And we'll talk about that in a second. Intervention teams, while they have the same rights, those kids as EC kids, and you have to treat them the same way, the governance piece is you and not the EC folks. The state considers an intervention team to be a school-based committee that is under the responsibility of the school principal. So if something goes wrong in your intervention identification, that first 90, it comes back to your doorstep, not to the EC people. You got to understand that. And then the reason why we have you go to the IEP team meeting, and a lot of you understand this and know this because you might have been the reg ed teacher that was in there, is that on IEPs, it doesn't matter who did the paperwork and did all the work. The decisions have to be collaborative. That's what you're supposed to learn from that. And that's one of the things that beginning administrators, if you're the LEA rep, and you will be, just like Jessica probably will be in some IEP meetings, she'll be the LEA rep. You have to understand that you just can't come in and say, here it is, this is what we're going to do. You can't promise stuff that you can't deliver, and you can't say we don't do that because federal law says you do. And so you need to understand that IEP is a collaborative document that parents have to sign off and that you can't say no. So we had you go do that, but we'll do a whole module on EC. And then bullying and cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is probably the worst thing going on in schools now. And oh, by the way, I predicted this 12 years ago, and I have evidence of that. I was the keynote at the big state conference, the one that's Curry, the old Sheraton in Greensboro, the DPI one they put on every year. I was the keynote in 2011, and I said, here's the 4 things that are coming. Cyberbullying was one of those. Unfortunately, I've been right on all of them. But, you know, it wasn't that I was clairvoyant, or I was charged the data in the biggest district in the state. So I just ran the data and knew what was coming. Unfortunately, I'm not telling you how smart I am, but the numbers don't lie, folks. And it's come to pass that this is a huge problem. Bullying, cyberbullying, not just with school kids, but sometimes with siblings, friends, parents. Sexual harassment's become a problem. Title IX, we'll cover all those specifically. And then, of course, due process discipline. You got to follow due process. You know, every decision you make as an AP can be appealed to the principal. Every principal decision can be appealed to the area superintendent or superintendent, the school board, to court. There's six levels of appeal. You got to follow due process. We'll go over that in depth. And so you interview an assistant principal or other school disciplinary. What's their biggest concerns about discipline? What system of discipline do you use? Observe a due process, and then field trips. And I picked this one out for financial about liability. What happens if a bus rear-ends a car? You know, and we do this one to amplify negligence. There's 3 functions of negligence: misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance. Nonfeasance is you had a duty to act and you didn't. Misfeasance is you did the wrong thing. You didn't intentionally do the wrong thing, but you did the wrong thing. And then malfeasance is you knew it was wrong, but you did it anyway. And that case kind of helps us highlight the difference between misfeasance, malfeasance, and nonfeasance. And our last case study, which is centered around, you know, an inclusion model of exceptional children, has all 3 embedded in it. Our 4 case studies this semester, when we get to the second half, are going to be about protected classes. We're going to use LGBTQ as it, but it could be any of our it could be EC, it could be any of our protected classes. It's going to be grading, because that's number 1. The number 1 function of a school principal, when you look at the legal list of things you have to do, is to grade and classify kids. You know, teachers don't assign grades, you do. It's a principal. And it's a case where a teacher is trying to fail the kid for the year, overturning his brother's home. And we'll go over that one. So grading is going to be a big issue because GPAs, scholarships, honor societies, valedictorian, all the way down. So grading is a big deal. So one of our case studies one's on finance. That's where we'll get into the Leandro case on flat funding, as I said. One is going to be on protected classes, and the other is going to be EC, but it really encompasses everything that we've done in both halves of the courses. We'll touch on all of these. There's negligence, there's exceptional children, there's lack of supervision. I mean, there's just everything that we've done will be in that last case study. And so that's, make sure you take a look at those. Now, our last thing this morning is this North Star deal, and we're just going to talk through it. We're physically not in the room where we can do this, but what I want each of you to do, and I can close now. Let's see if I've got it. Here we go. So according to, the compass points activity, northeast, south, and west, this is basically personnel styles for groups. So let me remind you, the way that we divide and conquer in building is we form PLCs. That's our stock and trade, right? That's our currency. That's how we started today. Just talking about the app cell and, forming our PLCs. Well, when we talk about personality styles, that's an individual thing, but we have to understand that there's those affect the group dynamic when we start putting groups together. And so there are 4 basic personality types in a group setting, not as an individual. Remember, This is kind of like Myers-Briggs, but Myers-Briggs for groups. And so here are the 4 group personality styles. Direction of action. The North group is just do it. Motivates and challenges others to get work started, to keep it moving, tries new things. So you have that group dynamic, the North people that in a group, let's do it. What would their emblem be? I always think, Nike swoosh, just do it. That's Nike. Then you have your West people. Wants to know the who, the what, the when, the where, the why before acting. Reliable to get things done, and they're organized, but they want to know everything up front. They don't just jump in and then start asking questions. They ask the questions up front. Then you have the South people. They only care about everybody's feelings. They're the self-esteem people. They rarely get anything done. And then you've got the East people. The direction of the big picture, wants to speculate about many possibilities. They want to talk about it. They want to have a meeting. Now, the North and the East people are diametrically opposed. The North people don't ever want to meet. They just want to act. They understand that the meeting is not the work of the organization. They don't even like to meet the plan to go do their work. That's the West people. The East people don't want to go do the work. They just want to meet. They think that's the work, is having a meeting. These are the different group dynamics, and you have to, so the idea here is that you have to categorize your group behavior, not just as an individual, your group behavior. And so what I want each of you to do now is I'll start first. I'm a North. If you said, Dale, let's get up on the roof, first thing I'd say is, I know a man's got a ladder. Let's go. I'm ready to go now, whatever it is. Problem with us is too many times we assume past the problem. Strength of our style is we get stuff done now. Limitations is that sometimes we assume past the problem. What's assuming past the problem? All right, I'll give you an example of that, and then I'll move to each of you and I'll put that part back up. So when I was first married to my wife, the curriculum instruction specialist, we lived in a rural part of the state in her hometown. And this was before there was such a thing as even cable TV, that part of the world. And so I had to put up a channel master antenna. Who knows what a channel master antenna is? You used to get TV by antenna. Put it up on your chimney or on the roof of your house, and you picked up your TV signal. It's free, but you picked it up that way. You got 3 channels. You got Asheville, you got Spartanburg, Greenville, and Asheville. You got 3 channels. Channel 7, Channel 4, and Channel 13. If you put your antenna up. And so when we got married, built this nice 3-story house. It was a basement, 1.5 stories, but had a chimney all the way up past the 3rd story. Had an 8-12 pitch roof, which is very steep. Of course, you have to in that part of the world, so the snow will slide off. You don't want snow load on your roof. But that chimney was about, right there, that thing must have been 50 feet off the ground at least. On an 8, and the roof it was on the end of the house, and the roof was like that. So I was standing out there on the back deck of the house, looking up at the chimney, and my wife came out and said, "What you gonna do?" I said, "Well, I was planning to put this channel master antenna, strap it on that chimney." She said, "What's the problem? You don't know how?" I said, "Yeah, I know how to strap an antenna on the chimney." She said, "You don't have the tools?" And I said, "Yep, I got the toolbox right here." She said, "Well, what you waiting on?" I said, "I don't know how to get up on the roof." I've assumed past the problem. The roof's too steep. I can't get up there. If I was up there, I'd be able to do that. But all my planning here was just go by the antenna, get my tools out. But now here I am, I'm not capable of doing it because I didn't set and plan that I got to get up to that roof. And you can't walk up an 8-12 pitch roof. And if you're up there, you better be tied on or you're sliding back down. Mm-hmm. Way too steep, way too high. So the problem with North groups or people in North groups is they assume past the problems. They're so interested in the solution itself and getting there that they don't see the individual pieces along the way. So what I've tried to do better over my youth is to be more of a West person who plans and prepares and then goes and does the work. But my natural proclivities is let's go. So that's my strength and that's my weakness. And so I want to be more of a West, and I have to fight my natural proclivities to be a North. So the group behavior is the notion here is how do you behave in groups? And how do you get groups to behave the way that you want them to when we organize schools into groups? So quickly, I'll go through each of you and let me share my screen again so that you can see again. So Corey, which of these are you? Northeast, South, or West?
I guess West, I'm more kind of a detail oriented kind of person, more of an analytical brain of, okay, who's in charge of what do we need, when's the due dates? Like even with this class, like you had mentioned like task stream on our Zoom thing, and I was like, okay, how do I get part of this task stream so I can submit that stuff? When is this stuff due? Like when are my books coming in so I can do this? It's very kind of list motivated, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the drawback to that? I mean,
sometimes you get tied up in the details.
Yeah. Devil's in the details. You get down in the weeds so far you never get out, and you don't see the bigger picture, and you never really get anything done because you get stuck in the planning phase, and you think about it so much, and you're so down in the weeds. At some point you just got to go do it. But yeah, you get paralyzed by too much data, and the problem with West people is they don't do anything. It stalls you into inaction, but that's good. That's good. And so in dealing with groups like that, a lot of times you have to tell them, we got to do it. It doesn't matter. I know that you're still thinking about it, but we got to do it, folks. I know you're planning. I know that you're trying to make sure, but nothing ever goes off as planned. A-team. I love it when a plan comes together, which is hyperbole that every plan they made would always fall apart immediately. They had to go, understand you're going to have to do plan B all the time. That's my advice to school administrators. You better have a plan B and C because it's never going to go as planned, but you got to jump out there. The point of knowing you got to have a plan A and A, B, and C is not that you will sit and not do anything. Is to go ahead and launch A, but have B and C ready. But you're exactly right. The problem with the West people is they overanalyze to the point of inability to move at all. That's exactly right. Siobhan?
I'm also a West. I will plan something to death. And but I think that also goes along with when we did our strengths last semester. Like my number one strength is deliberative.
Yeah, exactly. It's a strength. I mean, that's your strength, but it also can be your weakness. But you're exactly right. When we do these, by the way, with the EDCI, ladies and gentlemen, with our EDCI groups, all of you generally fall into the West category, but that's just neither here nor there. That doesn't mean you have to. And unfortunately for us, the LS people are always the North. But we need to figure out a way to combine those two. Beth, what are you?
So I'm gonna cheat and say I'm a Northwest because I like to get it done. But I'd like to know the details, you know, like who's responsible for what, and okay, now let's get it done, kind of thing. So
perfect. You need to, the notion here is you not only need to be a Northwest, but you need to make sure that the teams that you put together are Northwest.
I worked with a principal who could see the big picture.
Yeah.
And I balanced her because I was more the details.
Yeah. So you can't have the dreamers.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why I put myself in the middle.
Yeah, the Northwest is good. Jessica, you're in the job now. What are you finding?
I'm with Beth. I'm more of a Northwest.
Mhm.
I need the details to get it done. But
Yeah.
once I get the details, I want to get it done.
Yeah. And see, in the end, your job as a school administrator is make sure we get it done. Again, you can delegate the activity, but not the responsibility. We got to make sure it gets done. We are the bottom line. We are the last line of defense. We are it. We got to be that person that's not like Barney, that when we're in charge, we understand our job and we get it done and we don't do something crazy. We don't lose our mind. We don't buckle under pressure. There's a process to getting results in schools. And this is what Steve and I talked about last night, where we hurt some people's feelings, not intentionally. But folks, it doesn't matter if the playing field is level or not, is immaterial. We still got to win. We're getting killed by politicians and charter schools and private schools, and I've got friends in both. I'm not saying we need to close charters and privates. I do acknowledge that many of them have, advantages that we don't have, but that don't mean we don't try. We've got to get after it. We've got to win, even if the playing field is not balanced, if it's not level. It doesn't matter. Every school doesn't get the same level of kids, but you can grow them all. We can work that master schedule. We can work that gap analysis, that app sale, to find our weaknesses and work on them. We can make sure that budget, that master schedule, support that, and we can work that school improvement plan, and we can improve. There's a way to do this. It's not hope, folks. We can plan for success in the school business if we will stick to our guns and do the things that we know we need to do, and not let teacher input or whining and complaining and all that stuff overpower the professionalism and the things that we know to do. And if we will be the kind of Northwest people that are deliberative, plan, and prepared, but then actually let's go do it. That make sure that action plan gets put in place. That's why it's called an action plan. The deliberative piece, the West piece is all those steps of that graphic organizer that I showed you this morning. But then the actual, the North piece is let's go put it in place now. We built a plan that's doable. It's not a fantasy. It's not hope. It's an actual plan. Tomorrow we'll move into content. We'll meet again. I'll do a devotional at 9 o'clock. I hope that you will all come for that. It's kind of non-denominational, but I do a devotional. So the trilogy for our devotionals is always be a servant leader, live your life with integrity, and whatever your faith is, doesn't matter to me. One of my favorite students ever was Muslim. I'll show you a picture of her one of these days. Razan. Just be a person of faith. Build your life on a foundation of your faith. Those will be our trilogy that we'll talk about in the morning for just a few minutes before we dive into our content. I hope it hadn't been too boring today. It's not, this is not ideal. I would have loved to have done this in person. We could have a lot more laughs, but we've gotten through today, and I appreciate you being with me. So I'll see you at 9 in the morning. Everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you again.
Thank you.